Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee. Today's Tuesday, February 23rd. We have 13 bills before us today. Just to clarify for everyone, we are starting with 5 election law bills, moving on to 8 bills related to property tax. So we will stick to one topic and then move to the other. For anyone who is interested in 1042, that was withdrawn by the sponsor just yesterday, so it is still on the hearing schedule, but will not be heard today. It's been withdrawn. And reminding everyone about the 3-minute time limit for witnesses, and to see that timer in the top corner. And there's a lot of people testifying today, maybe more so at the end of the day, but just want to keep things moving. So please pay attention to the clock. We'll start with House Bill 1005, Delegate Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and distinguished members of the committee. Delegate Brian Crosby for the record, here to present House Bill 1005, entitled Election Law, Early Voting Centers, Number Required. This bill creates an intermediary tier to require 2 early voting sites based on the number of registered voters in a county. Currently, if you are below the 125,000 registered voter threshold, you only need to have 1 early voting site. And if you are over that, then you're required to have 3. My bill would require that counties between 70 and 125,000 registered voters maintain at least 2 early voting centers. Grapples with the issue of mid-sized counties and reflects the workability concern at the local level. As you've heard me say many times before in this committee, my county contains only 1 early voting location, despite being one of the largest in state by area, and despite our rapidly growing population. The voting location is located a pretty good distance away from our most populated area in Lexington Park and Great Mills, and this creates an additional unnecessary obstacle for my residents who just want to engage in their civic duty, especially the poor who rely on public transportation, elderly, and then our disabled community. We remove these obstacles for our constituents so that voting is accessible and convenient as possible. Counties are pretty much already moving in this direction on their own. And for these reasons, I urge the committee for a favorable report on House Bill 2005. And Madam Chair, I don't think I have any witnesses or I'm unaware of any witnesses signed up for this.
There are, but just to see if there's any questions for Delegate Crosby. Delegate, did you say how many counties will this impact besides yours?
I believe it is 5. I'll have to pull up the fiscal note.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Delegate Crosby? All right, we do have 1 person signed up, Reverend Kobe Little. Is Reverend Little here? All right, he is not. All right, nor is he in the waiting room. To members, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 1005. We'll move on to Delegate Wilkins' Bill 1047.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. Again, for the record, I'm Delegate Janelle Wilkins. I'm pleased to present HB 1047, the Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act. This bill actually builds on some of the policies that worked well in the 2020 election and improves upon them. And I think this is one that all of our constituents would really appreciate in terms of upcoming elections. As you all know, in 2020, more voters voted by mail than ever before. And I predict that we'll continue to see an upward trend in vote by mail because of this. This bill focuses on 3 areas, and I do want to commend SBE for implementing some of these policies, especially under emergency circumstances with a short turnaround. And again, this bill intends to make these permanent and also improve upon them. The first area is making drop boxes permanent. Drop boxes were really welcomed and enjoyed by a lot of voters. And this legislation will make it then permanent for at least 30 days before the election is when the drop boxes would appear for voters to return their mail-in ballots. The bill also requires an equitable formula for distribution to the counties. The local boards will determine the locations while prioritizing accessibility and security, and also ensure that these drop boxes are generally uniform so that there's equal access and equal security all across the state. The second area is ballot tracking. So I don't know about you all, but the number one question I heard during the election was, where is my ballot? I haven't gotten my ballot, and just lots of questions around tracking and understanding where the voter's ballot was. And so this bill will just enhance and provide more detailed real-time information about the ballots, when it's been received, estimate when it will be delivered, and so on and so forth. Third is the area of ballot curing. You all may recall that SBE reported to us that local boards voluntarily conducted ballot curing, meaning that they allowed a voter to fix an issue on their ballot if it was rejected. I want to ensure that we are requiring that and expanding ballot curing. So this bill will require SBE to develop regulations that require the local boards to provide a voter the opportunity to correct their ballot. So for example, if a signature is missing, being contacted and having the ability to fix that error instead of the ballot being rejected. I believe this bill will enhance the voting experience for all of our constituents, and I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. And in honor of you and your bill, I put my Dropbox photo from whatever it is, 2 weeks before Election Day. Nancy and I letting AJ's push our ballots in.
Oh, I love it.
I don't have photos for every occasion. We do have a few questions from colleagues, starting with Delegate Ebersole.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And Delegate Wilkins, great idea. Make this easier and better all the way around. I don't know if ballot tracking includes this, but I maybe Mr. Demarinis could answer too. I don't know. One of the things that people worried about is if there was some sort of damage done to a box, how would you know what ballots were in the box at the time? And could part of that tracking be a scanning device that actually scans them as they're pushed into the box, sort of like when you return books at the library and they sort of scan themselves back in? Is that part of the tracking, or has anybody thought about adding that?
On the second part of your question, that's what I envision, but we would actually leave it up to SBE. We detail out the specific things that need to be tracked, but the bill doesn't say it has to be, kind of like a barcode or something like that. We leave that up to SBE to determine. On the first question, if it's okay, I would throw that over to Mr. Demarinis.
Sure. I guess currently we don't have the ability, the drop boxes are not scanning the ballots as they're going into it. That's done once they go to the local boards, which then they get notified immediately. So if you if you drop it into the drop box, right, they're collected daily, and then then they are processed at the local boards by scanning it in, which then the notification system could take place there. I'm not sure about having it with that capabilities that you're mentioning, Delegate, with scanning it as it's being dropped into the Dropbox. I'll have to do some research and get back to you on that.
It's a tough one, but it would be great because we'll not go to the issue of vandalism, but let's say a Dropbox leaked and a lot of ballots were destroyed. You'd pretty much know exactly which ones were in there at that time because you could clear it each day as they were picked up. So I know it's a big ask, but it would be a good part of that good ballot tracking that Delegate Wilkins is recommending.
I'll look into that and get back to you. You're welcome.
Oh, that would be great technology. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. Actually, I think it was Channel 2 or Channel 11 News actually interviewed a gentleman picking up absentee ballots at a drop box. And he was there by himself, and he stood there and talked for like 10, 15 minutes. I'm thinking, wait a minute. He's standing there holding this box, and I don't know if it was sealed or not, and it does raise some concerns. Will they be a Republican and a Democrat to go to these drop boxes and pick these absentee? Is that required, and can we do that?
Thank you, Delegate, for the question. I don't know that I would recommend that we make picking up the drop boxes a partisan issue. My understanding is that they're hired staff of SBE that is responsible, that they don't have a partisan tint to them, and they're responsible for picking up and collecting the ballots. I'm not sure that would be a good idea for us to make it partisan by requiring a Democrat and a Republican to be there. I think it should be a nonpartisan activity in terms of picking up those ballots and making sure they get to the right place.
The only thing it does is raise questions about the integrity of what happens to those ballots from the time that they're dropped to the time that they reach the Board of Elections. We've seen what happened during the last presidential election, and whether it happened or not, I'm not going to get into that. But we want to make sure that we make sure that people feels like their ballots are secured and entered in a safe manner. I'm just a little concerned about that. How about as far as the cameras? Do they actually have a camera? I know some of them have security cameras. I think most of them do. Do they actually show the persons picking up the ballots, how that process is? They open up the ballot box, I'm sure they load them into a container, and do they seal them, or how does that work?
So under this bill, Delegate, we request that every effort possible be made to ensure that there are security cameras on the drop box. I have seen in my district the drop box being emptied, and the person would be, yes, within the camera in terms of when they go to empty it. I assume it might depend on the setup in different areas and different ballot drop boxes across the state. But from what I have seen, the person would be in the camera in terms of when they're emptying the drop box.
Well, I would like to see that part of it, that we can verify how the ballots were picked up and how they were transferred, just to make sure we don't have. It doesn't matter. It'd be nice if we could do that. I think it would be a good idea myself. Thank you.
I'll note that. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Delegate Long. And like you said, whether anything happened in the last election, for anybody who witnessed something should have called their Board of Elections if they saw something untoward happening, certainly. Delegate Palakovich-Carr with the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Wilkins, for this great bill. Two questions in regards to the ballot drop boxes. So the bill says 300. How does that compare, approximately to the number of drop boxes that were deployed, say, for the general election this past year?
Sure. Yes, I understand that SBE has about 292 drop boxes currently, and most of those were deployed around the state. Honestly, I just made it an even number and said we could probably use a couple more and made it 300. So it's not a very scientific number. Definitely open to working with SBE to see if we should go higher, lower, or a specific number there. But that's how we came up with that.
Great. And then just one other question. This is a bit parochial. I'll say I live in a municipality that has all vote by mail elections and has a permanent ballot drop box installed in a secure location at its city hall. As other jurisdictions, and actually the other municipality in my district is moving towards kind of a hybrid vote by mail approach, I would expect that there's going to be other, local secure drop boxes that'll be available. Would those be able to be used under this legislation as drop boxes? Because Rockville's was used for this past year.
That is a great question. I know that was a challenge in a jurisdiction in my district, Tacoma Park, as well, because those elections were taking place and it was a different drop box. So I think that this bill does not address that, but I would be open to figuring that out so that we can have a seamless process for all voters. Thank you for raising it.
Thanks.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this great bill forward. I actually had two questions, if I may. The first one would deal with the different touch points. I guess we could call it a certificacy of moving through these different steps. Although it's a really great idea, the more touch points that you have and the more visibility of a specific ballot, the higher the chance of reducing anonymity. you know, you could, I'll give for example, early voting, tracked precincts, you can, if there's only a few people that interact with the system, you can speculate potentially on who the people voted for. So I was just wondering, is there a way to disaggregate the ballot moving through the system versus someone having visibility on that person and when they voted? If you could talk to that.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand your question. So you're saying if we're tracking the ballots, there is a potential to look at a certain place and time and try to figure out who voted how?
Yes.
I think I would have to think about that one more, to be honest with you, Delegate. I don't see that as an issue. It seems like it would be extremely challenging to try to look at place and time and figure out how Janelle Wilkins voted at the Civic Center. So I would have to chew on that a little more, but I don't feel concerned about that in this bill.
Okay, and then the second question, on the paragraph that speaks to maintenance of absentee voting records, is that any different from what's occurring now? Because the fiscal note doesn't do a good job of saying what it was and then what it would be if the bill changes. So if you could just talk a little bit about
maintenance of absentee record. Can you tell me where you're looking in 1040?
Yeah, so that would be on the fiscal note, and it's page 4 of 7.
All right, I'm searching through my papers here. Hold on.
I mean, and I like the language that's there. I'm just, I wanted to know if it differs from what we currently do.
Page 4.
What's the exact language you're referencing, Delegate Hornberg?
It speaks to maintenance of absentee voting records.
Okay.
Board must.
I'm not sure that, I don't think that the bill addresses anything specific to the maintenance of the records. I have another bill that talks about that, but I'm not sure that this bill specifically addresses or makes changes in terms of handling absentee ballots. Is more so focused in on the curing aspect and having the ability to the ability of the voter to fix any errors. But I'm not aware of specific changes in the bill that would address what you're referring to. But you gave me 2 good things to look closer at, and I appreciate that.
No, and it's a good bill. And
let me just ask if either our analyst, Mr. Ward, or Mr. Demarinis at the State Board have any answer to your question in regards to whether this language impacts that what you're seeing in the fiscal note.
Great. And I would just add that I think that they used this process in Pennsylvania with the curing and actually had a lot of success with the ballots fixed on the front end. So applaud your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate, the fiscal note, that current law. So it's
okay.
It was just giving a synopsis of current practices at that point there.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Demarinis, for that clarification. If there's no other questions for Delegate Wilkins, we do have 8 people signed up on this bill, and just asking everyone not to try not to repeat all the pieces, but certainly this bill has many components to it, and love to hear what people have to say. We'll start with Rishi Shah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rishi Shah. I'm an associate with Maryland PIRG, the Maryland Public Interest Research Group, testifying in support of HB 1047 to improve our vote-by-mail system in Maryland. Thank you, Chair Kaiser, other members of the committee, as well as Delegate Wilkins for sponsoring this very important legislation. So as you've already heard, the legislation improves ballot tracking, brings back drop boxes, and creates a curing process for mail-in ballots. Like Delegate Wilkins mentioned, in 2020, mail-in voting was at an all-time high due to COVID. And as a result, voter turnout was also up to a record high, almost 75% in Maryland during the general election. Vote by mail likely won't be quite as popular as COVID wanes, but we should really learn from 2020 and expand on our vote by mail systems to continue to encourage high voter participation. Just to briefly touch on those three aspects of the bill, first, ballot tracking really does improve confidence in the system. I personally received my ballot weeks after my neighbors. I know some of you all have had that same experience. It's not an uncommon one. Knowing where your ballot is really reassures voters who are nervously waiting for their ballots, and it builds up confidence that the system is working as intended. And that confidence and trust in our electoral process is really important, especially right now. Second, ballot drop boxes should be brought back. Over 1 million Marylanders used them in November, and that was nearly 2/3 of all the Marylanders that voted by mail. Not only do drop boxes reassure voters that their ballot will make it back on time and safely, but they also save local governments money because return postage isn't required on ballots put in a drop-in box. And then finally, the curing process is really important. In 2020, nearly 5,000 Marylanders lost their right to vote because they didn't sign their ballot envelope. Nobody should lose their voice in our democratic process because they forgot to sign a piece of paper. 18 states already have a curing process, and voters get the opportunity to fix mistakes like not signing the ballot envelope, which is an important process. Moving forward on this legislation will really strengthen our vote by mail system, and it's going to play an increasingly large role in our elections and our democracy as we move forward. So I really hope that you all vote favorably on this bill, and we respectfully request a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. We next have Joan Antoine from Common Cause.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, members of the committee. For the record, Joan Antoine, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1047, which aims to strengthen our overall mail-in voting process. I don't want to be repetitive because I think, Delegate Wilkins and Rishi have already covered a lot of what I plan to say. I mean, I think the biggest piece here is remembering that all of the components in the bill were needed long before the 2020 election. It just happens that more voters were using the mail-in voting process in an effort to help flatten the curve. So these issues were a lot more apparent. In 2018 and years prior, we had voters calling our office regularly because they were confused about the tracking system, not knowing where their ballot was. A lot of them, honestly, not even knowing that there was a tracking system available online. So I think that the technology being used in DC, for example, with systems like Ballot Tracks, would allow for voters to get real-time updates on where their ballot is along the way and when being returned, using a method of their choice. So they could be via text, via email, or by mail, right? Making it a more equitable process. Curing, again, I know that local boards implemented a process, during the general election, but just streamlining and putting something more permanent in place. We know that in a lot of elections, as we heard at previous hearings, it can be a few voters that make, that really shift the outcome of that election. So making sure as many voices are heard as possible really is critical here, and curing allows for that. And I think in addition to that, voters loved the drop boxes. We've had a lot of voters, including our election protection volunteers, who have stressed wanting to use it again. This bill ensures that it is secure, that there are regular pickups, and more importantly, it addresses the accessibility issues that we heard about during the election. Ben Jackson from Disability Rights Maryland will probably cover a lot of that, but we know that there are voters with disabilities who had trouble accessing the boxes, and we want to make sure that that does not happen again. So, these are common sense reforms that were needed prior to the pandemic, and we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antoine. I'm going to take two more people before we take some questions. Husaifa Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and House Ways and Means Committee members. My name is Husaifa Mohammed. I'm the Government Affairs Intern for the CARE Office in Maryland. On behalf of the Council on American Islamic Relations, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 1047, entitled Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act. CARE is America's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. This past presidential election, we saw more people submit their ballots by mail due to the coronavirus pandemic. Many voters felt uncertain about mailing in their ballots due to rumors circulating about the safety and integrity of ballot drop boxes in various locations. This bill addresses such concerns during future elections by making sure that ballots are collected daily from drop boxes. These drop boxes are under security surveillance around the clock, and that they are completely safe for citizens to cast their vote. House Bill 1047 will also ensure that a reasonable number of drop boxes are accessible at strategic locations around each county for at least 30 days prior to an election day. This bill is a critical step in making sure the fundamental right of voting is accessible to all eligible residents across the state of Maryland. These drop boxes will also be compliant with the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act and will be accessible to communities with diverse demographics. This is especially important as voter suppression efforts consistently impact communities of color across the country. We support this bill because it simplifies the democratic right of voting, and we encourage participation in the voter process. Therefore, we respectfully urge your vote in favor of it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. And then we have the Reverend Kobe Little. Is he here this
He's
time?
not feeling
No?
well. Yeah, he's not feeling well. He had to, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then Janet Millson.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Delegate Wilkinson, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Janet Millson, and I represent the League of Women Voters in Maryland. Excuse me. The League supports voting by mail for Maryland elections, and as we saw in 2020, that was a very popular option. However, a lot of the procedures were implemented on an emergency basis, so if we want to keep them, they need to be enacted into law. House Bill 1047 incorporates many of the best practices we recommend for mail-in voting, including first, having enough ballot drop boxes, as people have discussed, equitably allocated, designed in place to make sure they're accessible and secure. Second, expanding the ballot tracking capabilities, another extremely popular feature of the recent election. And I won't go into the details, everyone has described that. Third, providing multiple options for ballot curing, which will help minimize the number of ballots rejected because the oath was unsigned, and make sure people can correct that problem before the end of the canvass. So in the 2020 elections, mail-in voting was used extensively and for the most part successfully throughout Maryland. The Mail-in Voting Enhancement Act builds on the lessons of 2020 and creates a strong foundation for increased mail-in voting in future years. Its provisions will increase voter confidence, improve accessibility, and make our election system fairer. The League of Women Voters therefore urges a favorable report on House Bill 1047. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you to the four of you who've spoken already. I'll call on the next group. We have Ben Jackson.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Jackson. I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights Maryland. Disability Rights Maryland is Maryland's protection and advocacy organization, a federally mandated program to protect and advocate for the rights of individuals with disabilities. Disability Rights Maryland is funded partially through the Helping American Vote Act, which is designed to ensure election access to a wide range of individuals with disabilities, including but not limited to individuals with physical, cognitive, and sensory disabilities. As you've heard from a number of other organizations, this ballot drop box rollout was very popular with voters during the 2020 presidential elections. However, there was a number of difficulties that were faced primarily by voters with disabilities. Disability Rights Maryland had received some reports that there were ballot boxes that were inaccessible due to the ballot drop box placement. Unfortunately, because this was these ballot drop boxes were deployed on an emergency basis, I don't believe the State Board of Elections had time to issue uniform guidance on how and where to place the drop boxes, and therefore they were inaccessible. There were a number of drop boxes that were placed flush with the curb, forcing individuals who used wheelchairs or other walking assistive technology to be in the street where their cars in unsafe manners, or place them out of the range because they were too high based on where the how high the curb was. So I'm encouraged by the language in HB 1047, which would mandate that the ballot drop boxes are placed in an ADA accessible manner. And for that reason, I would urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. We next have Audrey Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of this committee. A special thanks to Delegate Wilkins for bringing this bill forward. For the record, my name is Audrey Klein, and I'm the National Policy Director for the National Vote at Home Institute and Coalition. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit and a group of technical experts dedicated to increasing access to voting options for every voter, especially mail ballots. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the merits of House Bill 1047. My organization is proud to support this bill for 3 simple reasons. First and foremost, it's good for voters. To echo Joanne and Janet and Rishi and the other folks that have spoken already, I won't speak over them, but they've brought up the points that I would make there as well. But secondly, this bill is actually good for election officials as well. Drop boxes are a secure way to collect ballots and decrease the cost of elections over time. These boxes become a sunk cost that over time recoup themselves and that initial investment by decreasing the need for prepaid postage that's paid by the Board of Elections. Drop boxes can also be modular and create for creative solutions to help solve logistical problems and help more voters safely and securely. And finally, this bill is good for democracy. Making it easier for voters to cast their ballots is a fundamental way to ensure that our government continues to serve the people. These small but significant steps towards more equitable access and transparency in the process are important, and we're pleased to support House Bill 1047 with technical amendments as needed, and we urge this committee to support its passage. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions if possible.
Thank you. And then lastly, we have Sharon Minnick.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Sharon Minnick. I'm the Director of Legislation for the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland. And I want to thank Delegate Wilkins for introducing this important bill. I'm going to talk about a small amendment that Delegate Wilkins did say she would do, and I want to address that and hope that the committee will accept it. It's only a one-word amendment, but it's very important. So the bill states that there are several ways that the Board of Elections can communicate with the voter, and the voter chooses that method of communication, which is a good thing. It says text message, it says print mail, it says you can go in person, and it also says an online portal. And the amendment that we are suggesting is for it to say an accessible online portal, because we know that people forget about accessibility. Unfortunately, the Maryland General Assembly forgot about it when they were designing this virtual system. And if the Maryland General Assembly can forget, the Board of Elections can forget too. And so we hope to avoid the problem by just adding that one little word. The bill is an excellent bill because it states that the drop boxes should comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. For blind people, that means that there should be a sign. If there's a print sign on the box that says it's a ballot box, then there should be either a braille or a tactile embossed sign on there too. That's what it means to comply with the ADA. And if the general public has information about the box that it is then blind people need that too, because we need to independently verify that we are putting the ballot in the right place. So I hope the committee will give a favorable report, but I also hope you'll add that one important word, accessible. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to Mr. Jackson, Ms. Klein, Ms. Minnick. Are there any questions? Delegate Hornberger, back in your seat for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One more bite at the apple. If I get off the rails here, just pull me in to the group or to the bill sponsor scenario, if you will. On a slow day with the drop box, one person votes. That is tracked in a database that the Department of Elections maintains. That ballot goes to the person counting ballots, and there's no visible information on the envelope itself or the ballot that ties it to the voter, right? Like it's disaggregated, it's a barcode or it's a QWERTY code or whatever. If the person at the place counting the votes has access to the tracking database, they can surmise who the person voted for.
Is that your question? I think Ms. Klein wishes to answer.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you, Delegate. I think it's a great question. And while I can't speak to every county's processes for working in these scenarios, usually when a ballot comes from a ballot drop box, it is not my current understanding that anyone is ever actually tracking that exact ballot to that box. And when they arrive at a facility, they sort of get placed into, maybe a mail sorting box, and you will sort of lose the trail there. But furthermore, there's never actually anybody that sees your name and the way you voted at the same time. So when you're tracking data down to sort of a singular ballot, it's not my understanding that there's any process in which you could actually find, or even nobody would ever release the information of a single ballot.
Okay, we'll have to agree to disagree there. It depends on what level of tracking that you go to. So if there is if the inception begins at when I drop it in the box, and I'm the only person to drop it into the box for that day, even the disaggregation that's on the envelope and that the ballot counter sees, if they have access to that tracking mechanism, then they now know who that person voted for.
But they're not seeing the vote. The ballot is tracked, but not through when it's counted. I think that's not correct in the process. Maybe Mr. Demarinis can clarify that. Or we have people here from some local boards as well. Mr. Demarinis?
Sure. I don't think your scenario can occur, Delegate. I mean, at one point, you would put it in, even if there's just one in the box, right? That your scenario would also mean that it has to be counted that day as a single one, and then the tabulation would occur. No. None of that kind of occurs because we would hold it and put more ballots together, and it just goes into almost like a regular drop box and goes the processing of canvassing. Additionally, you separate the ballot from the envelope. And once that separation occurs, you're never going to be able to get that ballot back to that envelope. So there is no way of knowing who voted. I mean, this is all about the secrecy of the ballot. So even with all this extra tracking for the application and for the delivery of the ballot, it still is separated and canvassed separately and anonymously.
Right, but if you're tracking the ballot through every step, which is I first put it in the box, and then the last step, which is I open it, right? That you're tracking these incrementally. Then you now have the ability, if you are an insider, an employee, and you have access to this database that the voter has access to, you can now backwards engineer who that person voted for.
Mr. Demarinis?
So I guess, I mean, are you trying to say like that staff people have access to how people voted because they open up the mail-in ballots and separate the envelope from the ballot itself?
Yes. Yes.
I'm trying to understand, how is that different than getting it by mail and not tracking it?
Because
I guess his point is your concern about the anonymity is no different than someone hand delivering their ballot to the Board of Elections or mailing it to the Board of Elections. It seems to be a broader concern outside of the whole, it's a bigger thing than just this bill you seem to be suggesting.
Yes, right. I mean, it's about the mail-in ballot process. I mean, at one point there, by having this, you at one point, yes, the staff person has your application, basically has the envelope and your ballot inside. We try to separate it and then put the ballot off to the side immediately so that you don't see it once it's reviewed. But basically, that's how it goes. That you separate it and then it goes into another pile. And once you've separated the envelope from the ballot, you can never put it back together because it's never in any sort of order or any mechanisms there. So you can't, I guess.
it would be a matter of a short query into that database. And I mean, you'd have to do it to all of them. Okay,
Well, I guess my thing is you wouldn't,
my
because
question,
then, because you would still have to get it through the back end of when it was placed in the queue for the thing, which is not tracked. So whether your ballot is 1, 50, 100.
You said that it was, and this would only pertain to an issue where one person voted.
Well,
very hypothetical, I'm sorry.
Miss Berry from Mayo, who represents the locals. Miss Berry, if you could answer this question, and then maybe you and Delegate Hornberger can have a longer conversation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
But for the benefit of everyone on the committee, Miss Berry, can you answer that concern? I see Miss Berry's hand up, so I know she wishes to address this. Miss Berry, you're still muted.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you. Just to give some clarification to the process, when someone puts a ballot in the drop box or if they put it in the mail, when the ballot is returned to the Board of Elections, the staff take the barcode that's on the outside of the envelope, give the voter credit for the voting. They're casting their ballot, they're giving them credit for it, and that's what the voter sees online. And then those ballots are all combined together until we hold a canvas. And so when I say the ballot, it's the ballot sealed inside the envelope. And so when we go into our canvases, there could be thousands of ballots all together. And we have bipartisan teams that separate the ballot from the envelope at that point in time. But as far as the tracking mechanism, the way it worked in 2020, the voter was able to, or the way that I think it will work as proposed, the voter will be able to see when we mail the ballot to them, and then we will be able to give them credit for saying that we've received their ballot back in our offices. But to say that the ballot is separated from the envelope at the time of pulling that ballot out of the drop box, most, if not all, local boards didn't run a canvas every single day to do that process. So they're all locked away and secured.
Okay, so they become disaggregated once they're inside the voting counting area.
Right, during the canvas when it's open to the public and all of that, yes.
All right, thank you. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
this.
Thank you, and thank you, Miss Berry. She was not signed up on this, but we often go to or not signed up orally, but signed up just written. But when we do have experts like Mr. Demarinis or Miss Berry here, we do like to ensure that they get a chance to answer those questions. So thank you very much.
Sure,
thank you, Ms. Berry. Seeing no other questions for the last few people who testified, we are done with House Bill 1047, and we will go to House Bill 1048. Delegate Wilkins and I will change my background back to nothing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very much appreciate that background. Again, for the record, I'm Delegate Janelle Wilkins. I'm pleased to present HB 1048 regarding election law permanent absentee list. This bill creates a permanent absentee voter list for voters who choose to continue voting by mail, which allows them to enjoy absentee voting without having to request the absentee ballot each time. about half of voters who voted in 2020, particularly November election, voted by mail. This was extremely popular. And again, I predict that people will continue, people like me who were not mail-in voters or absentee voters previously, will continue to do so. And so the idea is that we create a list of absentee folks who want to continue voting absentee and make that a permanent absentee list. Any voter who's eligible can apply for this absentee ballot status to be permanent. They can apply in writing under this bill online as well. And they would need to do so by the deadline for the absentee ballot request before an election. When the voter applies, they would specify whether they want to receive their ballot in what form, whether it's mail or whether it's by internet. And then after applying, they would be put on this permanent absentee voting list and receive a written communication, sort of like a reminder 45 days before the absentee ballots are sent, reminding them that they're on this list, confirming their address and the method that they would like to receive the ballot. Voters on the permanent absentee ballot list will receive their ballot each time that there is an election. So this bill actually reduces the burden on the voter to continue to have to request, and also reduces some of the administrative efforts as well from the Board of Elections. I think this is another bill that our voters would very much appreciate, and I urge a favorable report.
Delegate Wilkins, I actually have a question or two. For someone who puts themselves on this list, you call it permanent, they would be able to take themselves off, I presume?
Yes, they would be able to,
Okay.
and they also would be required if they had a change of address or other changes to notify the board, and they would be removed in that way.
And then also if they would be, if they had signed up for online delivery and wanted mail delivery the next time, they could change that as well. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes, Madam Chair, they could make that request. And under the bill, the board would actually be required to send them a confirmation so that they would be aware that that change has been made.
I didn't realize I had a third question. I've often heard the criticism that permanent absentee ballot lists don't allow the Board of Elections to clean their mailing lists. So it sounds like you've created the accuracy of the list is still being maintained through your bill?
Absolutely. So the current list maintenance that the SBE undergoes will continue, but in addition, in terms of this list, someone would be removed if, obviously, as you said, they request to be removed. Also, if they remove from the voter registration list in Maryland, then they would also be removed from this permanent absentee ballot list. And if their mail was returned undeliverable, which lets us know that that address, that voter might not be registered any longer at that address, they would be removed. And finally, if they fail to vote the absentee ballot in 2 consecutive statewide elections, they would also be removed from the permanent voting list and would have to reapply. So it does clean up the list.
Thank you. I'm glad you addressed that because I think that's been a frequent criticism of such a proposal. Thank you. Delegate Hornberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On those kickouts that you just mentioned there, we have the databases talking to each other. For example, if I change my driver's license or if I go and do some other interaction with the state, would that also preempt a change?
If you change your address with the state,
Mm-hmm.
If the change was made, yes, to the voter registration list, that would prompt it.
Okay, but if I'm forgetful and I go change my driver's license, that wouldn't automatically change it.
It wouldn't be automatic. They would send notice to the voter and the voter would have to confirm. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. Any other questions for the delegate? If not, we will go. We have 6 people signed up this time, maybe 5, I guess, if Reverend Little is not well. We'll start with Mr. Rishi Shah.
Hi, everyone, again. My name is Rishi Shah, associate with Maryland PIRG, testifying in support of House Bill 1048 to create a permanent absentee ballot list. Again, thanks to Chair Kaiser, everyone on the committee, and Delegate Wilkins for sponsoring another great vote by mail bill. So you'll hear from some of the other panelists about the benefits of this list, especially for people with disabilities. It's also, as Delegate Wilkins mentioned, it's also very beneficial for elderly people and, even just people who know that they want to vote by mail and want to receive their ballot without having to fill out paperwork. So I just wanted to flag a couple of things. One, like Delegate Wilkins mentioned, 2020 was the first time a lot of voters voted by mail. And as a result, a lot of people realized that they want to continue voting by mail. And so as we see more people vote by mail in 2022, 2024, and going forward into the future, we really want to make sure that all of these new people who want to vote by mail don't face any unnecessary barriers. And if they know they want to vote by mail, they can get that absentee ballot in the mail and don't have to worry about missing a paperwork deadline. And the second thing is that this idea really does work in other places. 7 states, as well as Washington, D.C., have already implemented a permanent absentee ballot list. And some of these states have been using these programs for decades. And if you look at our written testimony, there was a study in San Diego County which showed that the permanent absentee ballot list increased voter turnout both for the election they were studying, as well as elections in the future, because people who sign on to the permanent absentee ballot list will continue to receive their ballots for future elections. So moving forward on this legislation will really create a more robust vote by mail system, reduce the barriers and inconveniences that people face when getting their ballot, and really ultimately increase voter turnout and participation in our democracy. So we respectfully request a favorable report.
All right, thank you so much. We next have Linda Cohen.
Hi, Madam Chair, Delegate Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Linda Cohen. I'm here today on behalf of the League of Women Voters to urge a favorable report of HB 1048 to create a permanent absentee list. We believe that a permanent absentee list can encourage greater use of mail-in voting, which is more accessible to most voters. It also benefits the boards of elections because, as was already noted, the provision to reach out to voters ahead of each election is a step to help continuously update the voter registration list. Previously, the League indicated its support for elections by mail on HB 153 from Delegates Ivey and Henson, and we also provided supportive input to Delegate Cardin on HB 274. We support voting by mail, and we acknowledge that there are different ways of conducting elections to get there. One of the policy issues before you is whether you want to have an opt-in system or an opt-out system. A permanent absentee ballot list is an opt-in system. At their choice, voters complete an application to automatically receive a ballot in the mail. So they are, rather than voting in person, I'm sorry. So they are opt-in to voting by mail. HB 153 and 274 direct elections by mail, in which all voters automatically get a ballot sent to them in the mail. If instead someone chooses to vote in person, they are opting out of voting by mail, opt in or opt out. A permanent absentee ballot list can be a means for transitioning over time to more voting by mail. It has the advantage of giving voters time to adjust to the shift in procedures in voting. And it also gives the boards of elections time to adjust things like how many and where to place in-person voting centers and ballot box and drop boxes. But we also know that significantly greater use of absentee voting, as well as conducting elections predominantly by mail, are approaches that can both work. We know that because we already proved it in 2020. The state did that in 2020. So we know that both approaches are feasible and both are embraced by voters. So the League supports a favorable report on 1048, and thank you.
Thank you very much. We next have Joan Antoine signed up.
Yes, for the record, Joan Antoine with Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1048, which would allow Maryland voters who regularly opt to vote by mail to opt into a permanent mail-in voting list. Similar to the previous bill, this one aims to strengthen the mail-in voting process and creates greater accessibility to our elections. You know, every election, voters who need to use this method have to make multiple requests. Sometimes this can, you know, serve as a barrier to voting. It can be confusing. People miss deadlines. Some experience issues, you know, using via whether or not they have ID to use the online system and paper system and so forth. So this bill just aims to streamline it, making it you know, where voters who want to regularly vote by mail can have their ballots automatically mailed to them, receiving updates along the way, and while still being able to make changes to the delivery of their to the address where their ballot is being delivered, and so forth. So similar to the other bill, we urge a favorable report and believe that this aims to address issues that long existed before the 2020 election. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antoine. We next have Ben Jackson.
Good afternoon. It's Ben Jackson from Disability Rights Maryland again, and urging a favorable report for HB 1048. Permanent mail-in voting lists have been recognized as an alternative voting method that assists in increasing the turnout of voters with disabilities by removing the barriers that Joanne had just discussed, and the possibility of unforeseen barriers in the future. Currently, 17 states permit permanent absentee voting, while there's 19 other states that have provisions for notifying voters in advance of other accessible options. The measures laid out in 1048 would really increase the equity amongst voters by removing barriers to enfranchisement by automatically sending out, creating this list and sending ballots to individuals who have, permanent disabilities and are the most frequent users of the absentee voting system. So again, we Disability Rights Maryland urges a favorable report for HB 1048.
Thank you very much. And I do see that Reverend Kobe Little has joined us. Reverend? You have to
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you. I'm juggling a couple of hearings, so if you would be so kind as to tell me the bill that we're specifically on now.
Sure, the permanent absentee ballot list.
This is House Bill
1048.
Yes, ma'am. For the record, I'm Reverend Kobe Little. I'm here representing the Maryland State Conference of the NAACP, and we are asking a favorable report on House Bill 1048. At the end of the day, we need to do everything that we can to strengthen our democracy, and strengthening access to the ballot and voting rights always does that. So we'd urge a favorable report on this legislation. Madam Chair, if you would allow me also just to inquire, have you heard Senate Bill 218 yet?
That's scheduled for the end. That's on our website. It's the last bill of the day.
Okay, very well. I'll be present for that hearing, and I'd like to just let the committee know that go on the record for the bills that were called earlier that I missed. My apologies. The NAACP is in support of House Bill 1005, House Bill 1047, and House Bill 1066, and we would urge a favorable report on all of these pieces of legislation in addition to House Bill 1048.
All right, thank you. Any questions for any of the people who testified just now on House Bill 1048? All right, seeing no questions, we do have Audrey Klein who signed up favorable with amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee, especially Delegate Wilkins for her work on this issue. Again, my name is Audrey Klein for the record. I'm the National Policy Director at the National Vote at Home Institute and Coalition. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on this bill, House Bill 1048. We're pleased to support this bill with technical amendments and are grateful for the opportunity to speak with the committee on the merits. Simply speaking, this bill is an important process improvement for both voters and election officials. With the massive growth in mail ballots over time, it can become an administrative burden to election officials to continue to process applications from the same voters over and over every election cycle. We don't believe that voting by mail is a fluke produced by the events of 2020. In fact, the growth of options like these seen in Western states is a sustained and continued process. So by the end of 2019, about 69% of voters in Western states were using mail ballots for every election. In 2020, voting by mail was actually the most popular option to cast a ballot nationwide. So we expect these trends to continue. And in November of 2020, just under 50% of voters voted by mail in Maryland. That's over 1.5 million people. Our group estimates that it costs about $1 for a local elections office to process a mail ballot request form. If even a fraction of this 1.5 million voters continue to request mail ballots in an ongoing basis over the next cycles, we could see a significant cost in administrative savings by allowing these voters to just use this simple single sign-up option, like the one that's prescribed in this bill. We think it's just a really important process for mail ballots. And we thank you for the opportunity to get to speak to the merits, and we urge the committee for a favorable report. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions for this witness? Thank you very much. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1048. I next have House Bill 1068 from Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members. House Bill 1068 is very similar to a bill that I brought before the committee last year, and it would actually continue a practice which was adopted on an emergency basis for this past election. Current regulations allow for one ballot to be counted if the same voter submits 2 mail-in ballots. However, if a voter submits a mail-in ballot and a provisional ballot, the current regulations require that both of those ballots be
cereal for lunch,
meaning the voter who was most likely just trying to make sure their vote got counted ends up losing their voice in the election. So House Bill 1068 would correct this unfortunate provision by specifying that the absentee ballot or mail-in ballot should be counted and the provisional ballot should be rejected. As I mentioned, this practice was actually approved under the emergency regulations for the 2020 general election, but those emergency regulations have since expired. So this bill would continue that policy of counting the mail-in ballot and rejecting the provisional ballot permanently. I ask for your favorable report and welcome any questions.
Sorry, question from Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess my structural question is, why not the other way around? Why not count the actual ballot that the person physically came and casted as their last known intent of how they wanted to vote, as opposed to the ballot that they presumably put in the mail sometime before they cast the provisional ballot? And the only reason that it would seem to me to be a better indicia of their actual voting intent is the actual thing that they showed up closest in time or on election day and filled out can be verified.
So there are two reasons why I think it makes more sense to go with the mail-in ballot. One is we know that the mail-in ballot they receive is going to be the correct ballot for where that individual lives. And depending on where they go to a polling place, a provisional ballot may or may not be the correct ballot for their address. The other is we really don't want to invite people to have a second bite at the apple, right? This is not a do-over if you change your mind. So we want to make sure that this is, not encouraging people to reconsider their selections and have a go vote again. It's really, when someone ends up submitting a mail-in ballot and a provisional ballot, it's probably because They were either nervous about, will the mail-in ballot make it and get counted? Or maybe they, are forgetful and are looking for their ballot that they think they misplaced, and it turns out they already mailed it, or a well-intentioned but not so helpful spouse may have dropped it in the mail for them. They think they lost it, don't want to miss the opportunity, so they go to a provisional ballot. But we don't want to create a second opportunity.
What's the impact that this would have? I mean, I don't know that it would be a tremendous amount of people, hopefully. But what impact would this have on the local boards of elections' ability to really quickly and accurately canvass these things? Because they're not counting the absentee, but so when someone shows up to vote and they're like, did you already cast a vote? I don't know. I don't remember, whatever. I want to cast my vote here today. So we let you vote provisionally. And then at the end of the day, they haven't counted the absentee ballots yet. Maybe we changed that law. I don't know, but they haven't counted the absentee ballots for days and days to come afterwards. How much of a strain is that put on people to now go back and say, whoops, Joe Blow has an absentee ballot. He's also listed on the provisional. We've got to figure out which one. I love your intent of not to spoil these people's efforts to try to vote through this dichotomy. I'm just concerned that, maybe it's easier to just say, if you show up to vote physically and cast a vote, that's your vote. If we get anything else, we throw that out, and then we at least know where you're at.
Well, I think actually from a canvassing perspective, it's much more efficient to count the mail-in ballot, because otherwise they can't start even opening or sorting the mail-in ballots until after they've received all the provisional ballots, right? So, and I think that's part of why this was adopted as part of the emergency regulations for the 2020 general, because of the sort of practical impact of if you have to wait until you see who cast provisional ballots before you know which mail-in ballots can be counted, then that really delays the processing of the mail-in ballots.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for Delegate Feldmark? There is one person signed up for this one, Delegate Feldmark, and I do apologize. When I was dividing up election law from the other bills, I missed that your other bill was also an election law bill. So we'll take that one right after this. But sticking first with this one, 1068, there is one person signed up, and that is Catherine Berry, who was favorable, who I think last year was unfavorable. So
yeah,
Ms. Berry.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you, Delegate Feldmark, for putting in this piece of legislation. Mayo does come to you today in support of this bill. And for the record, I am Catherine Berry. I'm the election director for the Carroll County Board of Elections and the co-chair of the legislative committee with the Maryland Association of Election Officials. After coming out of the 2020 election, we had a lot of emergency regulations. We canvassed mail-in ballots prior to election days, and we were very successful with that. So House Bill 1068 kind of goes in alignment with some other bills that Mayo has supported in this session, including the option to possibly open ballots before Election Day. We do feel that something needs to be codified in law, deciding which ballots should be counted so that there's consistency across all of the local boards of elections. And I'm not going to repeat everything that Delegate Feldmark said, but we do feel that if we have to wait until all the provisional ballots are canvassed, that could hold up the absentee canvass. And I should also remind everyone that years ago, both the absentee and the provisional were rejected when we got 2 ballots. So we are moving into, a practice of making sure that everybody gets their voice heard. So with that, I would ask the committee for a favorable report, and I will take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Members, any questions for Ms. Berry? All right, thank you. Seeing no questions, We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1068. As I said, we're next doing House Bill 1066, which is also election law from Delegate Feldmark. So go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So committee members, we have already heard a few bills this session focused on public campaign financing. And we know that small donor matching programs help limit the influence of large political donors. They increase public engagement in and confidence in our political process and expand access for many more community members to consider running for office. And in 2013, the General Assembly authorized counties to establish public campaign financing programs for their local elected offices in the executive and legislative branches. And several jurisdictions have already started programs. Montgomery County utilized its public campaign financing program beginning in the 2018 elections. Howard County and Baltimore City have programs established that are available for their next local elections in 2022 and 2024. And Baltimore County and Prince George's County will have programs in place for their 2026 elections. So what House Bill 1066 would do is authorize those jurisdictions that have adopted public campaign financing programs for their local offices to expand those programs to include state offices elected at the county level. So it's fairly straightforward. I'll keep it brief, ask for your favorable report, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Delegate Feldmark. Are there any questions for Delegate Feldmark on House Bill 1066? All right, thank you. Seeing no questions, there are a few people who signed up to testify. We'll start with Sukitra Balahandram. I apologize if I got your name wrong. I only imagine that I did. I apologize.
Thank you. I'm Suchitra Balachandran here on behalf of Our Revolution Maryland and also the Fair Elections Coalition in support of House Bill 1066. I wanted to start by saying that it is through the foresight of this body that we got the enabling legislation in 2013, which allowed for public financing, public campaign financing for the executive and council seats. And that has taken off in several counties, successfully run in Montgomery County. So I think that every candidate running for every elected position should have the ability to raise small contributions from the voters who elect them, small contributions that are then get amplified by public dollars that enable them to run viable races. And on the flip side, no candidate should really be forced to seek contributions solely from wealthy individuals who may support them as a social good, or deep-pocketed entities who support them with the motivation to influence them when they are elected to office. It costs nothing to vote. A candidate with good ideas and community support should not find money as the barrier to running for office. So it's public financing, public campaign financing is often seen as a plus for grassroots candidates, as a way for non-traditional candidates from underrepresented communities to run for office. And while that is true, I think the far bigger good for all of us as a society is that candidates run very different races when they run in a small donor program. And this strengthens our democracy. Too many citizens feel disenfranchised when they feel the government doesn't work for them and they don't vote. And enabling the expansion of the small donor program to all local races, I think really helped to build the kind of democracy that we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few more and then we'll take some questions. We have Kevin Canali from Mako.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canali here in support of House Bill 1066. You have my written testimony. I think the sponsor and previous panelists did a great job of explaining this bill. From a county perspective, you've heard several counties have undertaken public campaign financing. We appreciate the flexibility offered by this bill to expand from what is right now the offices in executive and legislative branches of county government, expand that outward to include several different elected offices. We think this legislation is properly leaving this decision in the hands of local governments, and we appreciate that flexibility again, and we'd ask for a favorable report on House Bill 1066.
Thank you very much. And next we have Reverend Kobe Little. I think he said he would be departing at different times. Jennifer Dwyer.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Dwyer. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Progressive Maryland, and I'm here to express our support for HB 1066. I've been working for the past 5 years to help counties across Maryland pass and design and implement public financing programs for their county executive and county council races. And one of the most common questions I get from council members and from members of the public is, well, this works for the school board too, right? And then I explain that it doesn't, and they're surprised. They say, well, we should change that. Public financing has become so popular in Maryland that since the enabling legislation was passed, 4 counties plus the city of Baltimore have all passed their own programs for council, executive, mayor, and city council. And at least 2 other additional counties that I know of are considering programs for their areas as well. Just this past November, public financing passed in Baltimore County with the support of 57% of voters, which is a pretty decisive margin. Public financing isn't just popular, it's an important reform for our democracy, as Suchitra was just saying. I believe that anyone who has good ideas and a call to public service and the support of their communities should be able to run a competitive campaign for office, whether or not they personally have a ton of money or connections to people who do. Finances should not be a barrier for Marylanders for them to be able to select the members of their community who they feel will represent them the best. And even though we're just talking about, very local races here, they can actually get very, very, very expensive. There's one school board race that I'm thinking of that happened in Prince George's County last year, where the winning candidate spent over $60,000 because the race was that competitive. So adding a public financing option will make it more feasible for a candidate in these races to raise the money that they need in a purely grassroots fashion, which we have seen from our experience in Montgomery County and through other states as well, diversifies the pool of candidates and diversifies the pool of donors as well, which makes government more reflective of everyone in the community, which is critical for ensuring that no voices are being left out and the needs of everyone are being met. In addition to creating a more reflective democracy, public financing also helps candidates out by allowing them to spend more time with the people they hope to represent and less time worrying about fundraising. They can raise all the money that they need just by knocking on doors and talking with voters. So given the interest in and the demand for public financing and the power that it has to strengthen our democracy, I think it makes sense to expand upon our existing public financing laws and give counties and the city of Baltimore the opportunity, if they choose, to create programs for additional local races. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, and we urge a favorable report.
Thank you so much. And then we last have Michelle Whitaker.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm Reverend Kobe Little here in support of Delegate Feldmark's bill on expanding access to small donor matching programs. In Baltimore, we enacted this legislation first by passing a charter amendment in the 2018 election, and then through act of the City Council. This legislation is important because it democratizes the campaign finance process and increases access for candidates who otherwise wouldn't be able to tap into big money, but who can tap into the support of their neighbors and friends in their jurisdiction. And for these reasons and the ones that have already been stated, we articulate our support and ask a favorable report on this legislation.
Thank you. I'll call on Michelle Whitaker again.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair Kaiser. Thank you, members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Michelle Whitaker. I'm a resident of Kensington, Maryland in Montgomery County. And I am here in favor and support of 1066. I urge a favorable report because as someone who's been an electoral advocate for this and touted the reasons that you've heard today for why this fair elections work so well, I also know that this works well as a practitioner. I've had the fortune to work on fair elections races, not only in Montgomery County, but also in DC, where they use fair elections programs for their local races. And I see the impact and the difference it makes in terms of who's running, who gets involved in campaigns, and what are the issues that are discussed within that campaign cycle. As someone who's worked on these campaigns, I've seen the difference that it makes for candidates as they're engaging with voters. They're not spending time just dialing for dollars. And I know many of you have experienced that. What they're doing is focusing on the issues, and they're able to talk to voters about how contributing a small amount can be multiplied and have their voice increased in terms of lifting up candidates who are really speaking to their issues and to their community needs. In addition to that, we know that it helps to bring new voices in, people who haven't traditionally been able to access large amounts of wealth to run for office. The public financing system gives community organizers, everyday people who really are passionate about this, but feel like financing has been a barrier to them actually running an effective race, to be able to compete on a level playing field. As someone who also works on advocacy issues related to women's representation, we've seen the benefits of public financing with women candidates being able to run successful campaigns and win successful campaigns using public financing dollars. I urge the committee for a favorable report on this, and I believe enabling the statewide availability of fair elections programs for all county races just prevents us having to go back and have a discussion every time that a community would like to do this, and makes it available to all communities to enact when they choose, and to be able to harness the power of voters, candidates, and residents to really have a stronger voice over big money in politics and special interests just dominating the conversation and the issues. So thank you very much, and I urge a favorable report on 1066.
Thank you so much, Ms. Whitaker. Questions, Delegate Hornberger?
Yes, thank you for bringing this bill. I really like the idea. Two questions. One, the impetus for the bill is to get more folks participating and run for office, and that's great. However, as you get a little bit farther down the ballot, especially with municipal elections, at least in my county, we are really struggling with people to even run for office. These are for your smaller towns, for example. So my question is, do you have any appetite, or is there a vehicle to get funds down at those lower levels, because we can't even get candidates for many of these positions? And if you could answer that, and I'll answer my second question.
I'd be happy to have that conversation. I mean,
okay,
it really
great.
wasn't part of what I envisioned for this bill, but I'm happy to look at that and work on that with you.
Okay, excellent. And then the second question that I had is, as we expand this universe and the people that can tap into these funds, and we go farther down the ballot, it's, the threshold for entry is a lot lower, in other words, and the group, the swath of people that can run for office, right, there's very low bar to be able to run for office, residency and age. Is there a way to put in there a clawback provision, basically for like a bad actor? So if I opt into this system and I'm a really terrible person and I'm running on a really terrible platform, it could really jeopardize this sort of program. And I have a concern about that. I mean, if I'm trying to think of something horrible here, I don't want to offend anybody, but if someone runs with an extensive criminal record, or they're perpetrating crimes or doing something heinous during the campaign, and they're tapping into this fund, it could jeopardize the program. So it's just a philosophical question. What would happen in a scenario like that?
Ms. Whitaker, did you want to answer that?
Sorry, no, I thought there was a different part of the question, but
okay. Did anyone want to answer that, or Delegate Feldmark?
Well, I would just say, I mean, I think, the counties establish their own standards for participating in the program. And, typically that includes a certain number of donors and a certain amount raised before you qualify to participate. I think they have the flexibility to add other criteria as well. I know the counties work closely with the state board to make sure that the program they're adopting meets the state board regulations. So I don't know if Mr. Demarinis has more to add, but I think issues can be addressed in the specifics of the local program.
Sure.
Okay, and another question, Delegate Lukey.
Madam Chair, I was just going to add to the previous conversation to Delegate Hornberger. I think you need to be careful of the potential free speech implications of limits depending on the issue, right? I think there would be a lot of constitutional issues that you'd have to think through there. But
yeah, again, it's a philosophical.
Sure, I got you. I'll just say we used a system like this in Montgomery County last election, and there were no problems, none.
Yeah, granted,
it's actually.
Well, we are expanding it a great deal, and.
Well, and I would also point out, Delegate, that people with criminal records are allowed to run. I would suggest maybe
correct.
Heinous would be spending the money in the ways that aren't allowed under election law, but then that is its own.
That is a crime itself.
Yeah, I believe so.
No, I think it was more so of if the jurisdiction wanted to have a clawback, could they?
Council looks like they're both pondering. I'm getting pondering looks out of them, but I think I'm also getting the no look out of them. Ms. Whitaker?
I'll just say to, not speaking to the merits of why you would do a clawback, but within the provisions already, there's ways that if you, in Montgomery County, if you don't qualify, get certified to actually use matching funds or something else happens, there's ways that you're returning the money at the end of the campaign that would be received as matching funds. I know Mr. DeMarinis can speak to that as well, but that's more at the end of the program, that if you ran under public financing, you didn't win, but you had leftover money, that gets come back. I don't know how you would define a program to claw back funds for that penalty, but I'm assuming it might be similar to how that is written for how you handle money that is left over at the end of the campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Any more questions? Delegate Hornberger, did you have another question?
No, I was trying to lower the hand there, sorry.
Gotcha, no problem. All right, members, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 1066. We'll move to House Bill 1085. Delegate Wilkins to chair the committee for a moment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we'll begin the hearing on House Bill 1085, and Madam Chair is the first speaker.
Well, I thank you, Delegate Wilkins, or I should say, Madam Chair, as you are in the moment. To members, before you I have House Bill 1085, and this really came out of the election last year, and I was reading news stories after the election about Georgia and Virginia and some other states having laws that if you try to conspire to get somebody else to commit election fraud, that it is a crime in those other states. And that I then reached out to our analysts to say, is this a crime in Maryland? We did some research to say that it is a crime in Maryland to ask somebody to commit voter registration fraud, but not necessarily to commit election fraud itself. You could argue that there's some other laws in place about conspiracy, but seemingly there was not as concrete a law as some other states have. And I think it's important that we in Maryland have this law in the books moving forward, hopefully never needing to use it. But I thought we should do so as well. I did talk to the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and they had and I know that they're offering 7 amendments through written testimony, and certainly I'm interested in taking those. And they just wanted to make sure that the language lined up with other things that we have in law. And I ask for your favorable support on House Bill 1085.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have any questions? All right, I don't believe I see any, and there are no witnesses on this bill. So that concludes the hearing on House Bill 1085.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. I'll take it back over. I appreciate your help there, Madam Election Law Subcommittee Chair. We'll move on to the property tax portion of our day, reminding everyone again that House Bill 1042 was withdrawn and that I already had us do 1066 because I had mischaracterized them when I was doing the bill order the other day. The first bill we do have on property tax issues is House Bill 1015 from Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. I'm Terry Hill presenting House Bill 1015, which is another product of the Attorney General's Access to Justice COVID-19 task force designed to help us in Maryland develop strategies and solutions to address the significant civil legal challenges facing Marylanders in the wake of COVID-19. So this is a pretty simple bill. It simply says that where inheritance of residential property is concerned, the taxes that are owed as a lien on the property can be paid after the property is inherited if it's inherited by a family member. So why would you do this? We know that the home is for many families, particularly families of limited income, the most valuable component. And for many families, trying to inherit the home becomes problematic because they don't have the money to pay any taxes that are owed. And if they can't access any tax credits or other things that would be available as a homeowner, then it makes it that much more difficult. So what this would do would be allow for, as I said, for the family to go ahead and, or the heir to inherit the home. They would then be able to access any funds that are available as a homeowner, like a homeowner tax credit or anything else that they financially would be eligible for that could help them to pay off the taxes on the house. There are a couple of scenarios that you can imagine. One would be that they inherit and they're still not able to pay the taxes. They could then sell the home and the taxes still get paid, so the state does not lose in that realm. And the other is that they would inherit, again, be able to access certain kinds of discounts on the taxes owed and be able to leverage that to pay that off and keep the house and the family. And finally, that whether they get the tax credit or not, being in the home allows them to maintain, in some cases, what has been the family home, where we often have multiple generations living with the decedent. And so I think in all ways, this is a win for the state because it decreases the cases of homelessness or displacement of family members. It increases the likelihood of home ownership being able to pass on from generation to generation. And there's no real risk or loss to the state, because if a tax lien is present and that property still has to be sold, then the money is collected from the tax lien when the house is sold outside of the family. So with that, I'd urge a favorable report in this wonderful written bill.
Thank you, Delegate Hill. Any questions for Delegate Hill? All right, thank you very much, Delegate. We do have one person signed up. We have Timothy Chance.
All right, thank you. All right, so thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today. So my name is Tim Chance, and I'm the Tangled Title Attorney at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, and I assist with our My Home, My Deed, My Legacy project. As part of this project, we encounter many clients facing economic barriers, such as significant tax bills, and that makes it impossible for them to transfer a property. So I'm here today to respectfully give you my reasons to support House Bill 1015. So in the My Home, My Deed, My Legacy project, we provide homeowner clinics to help Marylanders stabilize their homes and secure critically important resources for the long-term ability to remain in those homes. Additionally, we provide continuing direct representation to clients navigating the probate and deed transfer process. So many of these clients are the surviving relatives of deceased homeowners. Our clients have lived in the homes for decades and are the de facto owners. They make mortgage payments and they keep the upkeep of the house in order. But in order to transfer the property into their name, they must go through probate. So along with the cost of probate, they must pay any outstanding property taxes in order to record that new deed. And that presents a major barrier for our clients because they must bear the full burden of those taxes. The client's limited resources coupled with the historical overassessment of homes in communities of color leads to housing destabilization and the extraction of wealth in those communities. Without the resources to pay those taxes, many of our clients face the real prospect of losing their homes. I just want to briefly talk about a client who's dealing with this very issue right now. So Lucille lives in St. Mary's County. She's been there since 2011. The property is titled in her husband's name, and in 2012, he took out a reverse mortgage on the property. Sadly, in 2019, Lucille's husband died. So Lucille opened an estate, and as the surviving spouse, she's entitled to stay on the property as long as she keeps up with the property taxes. But the annual property taxes for the property are in excess of $4,000. Lucille only has an annual income of $16,000, and she's unable to pay this without the assistance of the homeowner's property tax credit. But due to the prepayment requirement, she was forced to seek significant assistance from her family members in order to satisfy this year's taxes. And she simply can't do that every year. So because she can't access the credit or other resources, the property was at greater risk of being foreclosed upon. Unfortunately, the situation is way too common. I would like to refer you all to my written testimony that highlights another client in Baltimore dealing with a very similar issue. So the removal of the prepayment of outstanding taxes is not an abatement of those taxes, it's simply a deferral. Taxes will stay on the property. These individuals will still be incentivized to pay taxes like every other homeowner, but now they can access those critical resources up front. And nevertheless, we're deeply committed to the stabilization of our communities, and this is why I support House Bill 1015. Thank you.
Please note that there's
Thank you so much, Mr. Chance. Were there any questions for Mr. Chance? All right, thank you very much. And thank you to Delegate Hill. Good seeing you today. To everyone, again, the next bill on the list, 1042, was withdrawn. We next have House Bill 1050 from Delegate Rosenberg. Delegate Rosenberg, are you here?
Yes, I just had to unmute myself.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. House Bill 1050 is in response to a specific constituent concern, but I would doubt that it's an isolated example. And I should also point out that Seth Rosenberg, who I believe is ready to testify on this bill, is not a relative. He grew up in the district. His late parents, regretfully, were long residents of the district. But their recent passing is what prompts this legislation. His parents were ill for quite some time. We're not aware of the fact that there were problems with the tax sale of their property, that it was going to be put on tax sale for their failure to pay taxes. So what we've worked on is what this legislation would do is ensure that individuals are notified. Any individual who holds a lien on a property or a remainder interest in the life estate would be required to receive a copy of the notice from the tax collector before the property was sold at the tax sale. In this instance, Seth had a life interest in the property, but when he sought to sell the property, he now lives out of state, it had already been sold at a tax sale. So this is a transparency bill, would require that there be notice to the relevant parties prior to a tax sale. And for that reason, I would urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Rosenberg. Any questions for Delegate Rosenberg? All right, thank you, Delegate. Person we have to testify is Seth Rosenberg. Again, no relation to Delegate Rosenberg. Mr. Rosenberg, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Of course, again, thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Delegate Rosenberg. He gave a good recap of the situation, so taking a lot out of what I had intended to say today. But what I wanted to remind you, of course, as I said, I'm no relation to Delegate Rosenberg, and as I've known him and many people for the years, his father always used to remind people that we were of no relation, because his father and my grandfather were in the same industry as well. So I speak to you today, as I said, in support of this legislation, realizing that I personally will get no benefit out of this. But other than a concept in Judaism, which is called tikkun olam, making the world a little bit of better place with our deeds and actions. So as Delegate Rosenberg mentioned, my parents passed away in this last year in January and June of 2020. So they had been really ill, in and out of the hospital, leading up to their passing. So this bill will prevent inconsistencies in the current tax sale process that happens. So while I indeed was a life estate holder, and there was also a lien holder, the city of Baltimore chose not to notify either of us in this situation, even though current legislation says it's in their purview. They left it to just the Sun papers, and well, unfortunately, I live out of state now, and I don't get the Sun papers. So I would have helped my parents pay the taxes. I already helped them pay the mortgage leading up to the situation. Instead, in lieu of that 50-cent stamp, or well, bulk mail, probably 22-cent stamp, I'm charged a 48 times percent interest on the late penalties. So when I go to sell that property, when I'm working to sell this property, I'm going to charge 48 times what the current borrowing rate for the state is. And so it's not that I wanted to get out of taxes, and not that anybody should get out of taxes, but my parents had been left in a situation where they had been a benefit of the tax credit program and would have been up until their passing. Unfortunately, due to their illness, they did not necessarily complete paperwork in a timely manner. Now, as mentioned, I reached out to Delegate Rosenberg to help me with this matter, and he did his best. The state said they couldn't find me or the lien holder, but magically, after he sent his request, they could find me. They didn't ask for the address from him, but they were able to find us. So this is just designed to close up the inconsistencies and to hope this doesn't happen to anybody else in the future. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Any questions? All right, thank you, sir. Thanks for being involved today. Sorry we couldn't help you originally with this issue. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1050. We'll move to House Bill 1137. Delegate Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm Delegate Ken Kerr, here to present House Bill 1137, Property Tax Credits for Business Entities During a State of Emergency. This bill authorizes county and municipal governments the ability to grant a property tax for real or personal property owned or leased by a business entity affected by a declared state of emergency. County and municipal governments may determine the amount and duration of the tax credit, the eligibility criteria for the tax credit, the regulations and procedures for application and processing, as well as whatever else may be necessary to carry out the tax credit. Under the tax property article, which is current law, all local governments are subject to statewide mandatory tax credit programs and are authorized to grant tax credits for certain types of property. However, the authority to grant local tax credits must be provided by state law. House Bill 1137 authorizes counties and municipalities to provide a property tax credit for businesses that are affected by a declared state of emergency. This is enabling legislation, and no local government is required to participate. But for those for whom this authority is wanted, this bill would allow them to do so. In my home county of Frederick, between 15 and 17% of the county's business infrastructure might not make it through the current pandemic, according to the local Chamber of Commerce. Additionally, every single sector of the 62 business sectors tracked by the Chamber has suffered some level of loss. It's more likely than not that the other 22 counties in the city of Baltimore are experiencing similar, if not greater, economic hardship as a result of this declared state of emergency. And while this bill would not apply to the current tax year, I offer these as examples to illustrate how businesses may benefit from a tax relief bill if local governments were authorized to provide such relief in a future state of emergency, or should the current state of emergency continue past June 30th, 2021. And I request a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate Kerr. We do have some questions on this bill, and after we're done with your bill, we're going to go back to the last bill, but for a second, because I forgot somebody. But first, we have a question for you from Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Kerr, thanks for bringing this bill. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly. So this would give any county or municipality the ability to do a credit at their option, again, not only real property, but personal property tax as well, right? They'd have the option to do that.
That's correct, as well as rental property.
That's fantastic. Thank you. This is a great bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions for Delegate Kerr? We have one person signed up to testify. I will call on Mr. Kevin Canale. And Mr. Canale, after we finish with this bill, we will go back to the last bill where I forgot to call on you. So I apologize. Hope you saw that in the chat. Mr. Canale, in favor of 1137. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canale here in support of House Bill 1137. As you all know, counties are partners and we are committed to restoring our economic prosperity in the state and helping businesses. But you've heard from me many times before, we appreciate this approach as it gives us local autonomy to determine whether or not this program is right for the county, how much revenue they're willing to forego. Delegate Lukey just mentioned they could do this for real property, personal property. Delegate Kerr mentioned also for rental property. So this really gives us every tool in the toolbox to try and provide needed support. So again, we appreciate this flexibility. We think that this is great for serving and reacting to local needs, and we'd ask for a favorable report on House Bill 1137.
Thank you, Mr. Canale. Almost always the most concise person testifying. Any questions for Mr. Canale on this bill? All right, thank you, everyone. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1137 on Delegate Rosenberg Bill 1050 on tax sales. I left out Mr. Canale, who was opposed. Go ahead, Mr. Canale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kevin Canale here, again, on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in opposition to House Bill 1050. I certainly heard the testimony and I can empathize there. And the reason why we're in opposition is not because we just don't want to send these sort of notices. The issue is we don't have access to this information. So under current law, we do provide the last owner that's listed as the owner of the property with this notification. We also have to put this in the newspaper for 4 successive weeks in a county, in a newspaper of general circulation in the county. I understand that would not have helped the gentleman that was speaking before, but in order for us to get this information, we would have to run a title search essentially on every single property. That can be expensive. You see in the fiscal note, some counties did respond that it will be expensive to run all these title searches as well as for the mailings and the postage associated. So it's not that we wouldn't want to do this. It's really about the cost and the fact that we just don't have access to this information. And, you know, in order to comply with some of the timelines with tax sale, in order to get that information, hire a company to do the title search, there is concern about the administrative toll as well. So happy to work with the committee to try and figure out a way to maybe ensure that the situation before doesn't happen in the future. But, you know, again, it's just that we don't have access. It's expensive to get it. And we'd ask for an unfavorable report on House Bill 1050.
Thank you, Mr. Canale. Any questions for Mr. Canale on House Bill 1050? All right, thank you very much. All right, back to the regular schedule of events, and to members, we have the 3 House bills left and then the 1 Senate bill later. We'll go next to Delegate Attar, House Bill 1079.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. For the record, I'm Delegate Attar here to present House Bill 1079, Admissions and Tax Exemption, Activities that Promote Health and Physical Well-Being. It was brought to my attention last year that counties and municipalities may tax up to 10% gross receipts derived from what's considered certain amusement-related activities. There are specific exemptions already in the law, including a wrestling match, bingo, and bowling. Our tax policy should promote our policy goals. I'm not exactly sure why specific activities like wrestling are excluded, but one thing I do know is we as a society should be promoting health and physical well-being activities, especially during a pandemic that has affected many people's health and physical well-being. Ensuring people are staying healthy has not only long-lasting positive physical effects, but it has been significantly proven that our physical activities significantly improve our mental health. We are seeing daily challenges with mental health increasing, and it is extremely concerning. There are many ways to go about dealing with this type of illness, and one is by promoting healthy and physical well-being activities. House Bill 1079 does just that. It prohibits counties and municipalities from imposing an admissions and amusement tax on the gross receipts derived from any charge for participating in an activity that promotes health and physical well-being, or admission to an establishment that offers activities that promote health and physical well-being. Just like those who go bowling or to a wrestling match don't have to pay this extra tax, those going to play tennis, to fitness centers and gymnasiums should not have to pay this extra tax. As the Maryland State Advisory Council on Health and Wellness stated in their written testimony, lack of money can be a constraint or barrier to participation in sports and physical activity for adults and children. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its devastating economic effects have many families struggling to simply pay their bills, let alone afford the extra fees associated with keeping their loved ones healthy through physical activity. The fiscal note states that local admissions and amusement tax revenues decrease by a significant amount, yet it's followed by a sentence that states the amount of the revenue decrease cannot be reliably estimated and depends on the number of businesses that qualify for the exemption in each jurisdiction and the actual gross receipts of each exempt business. I note that Garrett County says this tax exemption applies to boating amongst other activities, thereby the county losing almost all of its amusement tax revenues. I'll therefore leave you with this. I'm open to amendments to ensure this bill ensures the promotion of one's health and physical well-being while not excluding activities that are not directly related and thereby harming specific counties. I ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Attar? All right, seeing no questions, there are a handful of people signed up. We'll start with Isaac Pretter.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Isaac Pretter. I'm a private citizen who lives in Baltimore City. I'm in support of House Bill 1079. I've never testified in front of any committees in Maryland before. I enjoy playing tennis and other sports with friends and family members. For about half the year in Maryland, it's possible to do this outside, but for the other half of the year, we generally need to find indoor locations. Years ago, I noticed that many gyms and indoor facilities were closing due to the difficult economics of the business. I also noticed that when I book a tennis court, there's an additional 10% amusement and admissions tax added on. I know that the business pays a tax, but ultimately it costs the customers more money. This makes it that much more difficult for those interested in healthy activities to afford to do so, and for gyms and fitness centers to stay in business. I looked up the tax online and found that it had numerous exclusions at the state level for activities such as bowling, live boxing, wrestling, charter fishing, and many other activities, including many more exemptions at each county level, including political fundraisers. This doesn't seem fair for the state to pick and choose which activities should be taxed. I think it's in the state's best interest for the state and all the counties to promote healthy activities and exercise. This has been proven, as was mentioned, to reduce medical costs, increase productivity, and improve mental health. Those benefits, in my opinion, would far outweigh the reduction in revenue from the elimination of this tax on healthy activities, especially now during COVID, when many more gyms are going bankrupt and closing, and exercise has been shown to limit the severity of people who test positive for COVID. The state should implement this forward-thinking bill that will be a win for all in Maryland. I urge the committee to give House Bill 1079 a favorable report.
Right, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. We next have David Chernowitz. Mr. Chernowitz, are you here?
Good afternoon. Yes.
I am here. Apologize for that. Like Isaac, I too am a private citizen of Baltimore City. I'm a business owner here, and I just wanted to share, to add to Isaac's well said support for House Bill 1079. I want to share some of my own personal experiences with you, Madam Chair, and with the rest of the members of the committee. I grew up as a child heavily overweight. I struggled with weight for pretty much my entire life. About 7 or 8 years ago, I started playing tennis, lost a lot of weight, and it's helped me maintain a healthy lifestyle that's not only benefited my own personal health, but that of my family. And I can attest that while engaging in these sort of healthy activities, that it's improved my ability to actively run my business, positively run my business, and it's affected not only, like I said, my personal health, but my relationships, my interpersonal relationships. So again, I want to reaffirm my support for this bill, and I think it's something that certainly requires consideration.
All right, thank you both so much. Questions, Delegate Lutke?
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pretter, for your first time testifying, you did a great job. I hope you come join us. I just want to clarify for everyone, because boxing and wrestling have been mentioned a couple of times. So there's a separate boxing and wrestling tax at 10%. So they do, boxing and wrestling events do actually pay a tax. It's just there's a specific tax just for them, but that takes nothing away from the rest of your argument. So I just wanted to clarify, and the chair will glare at me unless I say, isn't that so?
I'm going to glare anyway. I'm just kidding. I love you, Delegate Lutke. Delegate Long with a question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have is, I'm looked at this and mentioned sports fishing. Is this going to remove that?
Thank you. So there are a lot of exclusions that are listed in there, like that were brought up in opposition testimony. And that's why I'd like to work with the committee to amend it to ensure this is specifically for activities that promote the physical and mental well-being.
Right. So
that is an exclusion right now, but I am open to taking that out and ensuring it's not affecting specific counties.
Right. Has anyone here been sports fishing before? Because it is quite an activity.
All right. Any other questions besides Delegate Long's broad question to everyone about their experience for sport fishing?
If you haven't been, you got to go.
All right. Thank you. We do have 3 people signed up in opposition. We'll start with Kevin Canale from MACO.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in opposition of House Bill 1079. I'm happy to hear that the good delegate is willing to work on amendments. And really, I mean, you've heard this show before from me. We think that these tax issues should be a local issue. I heard earlier in testimony that the state shouldn't pick and choose as to which activities get this exemption, and I generally agree with that. I know that there are several exemptions in state law. I'm sure a lot of those go way back before my time, before many of our times. And I'm not exactly sure how some of those got carved in. But at the local level, there is a process for counties to consider these kinds of requests which affect local revenues. This is not a state revenue source. So really, I don't think that the state should be legislating in this area when it comes to what should be exempt from a local admissions and amusement tax. Happy to work with the sponsor and the committee to maybe clarify some language, but we do believe this would have a significant fiscal impact, and this should be a local decision with local elected leaders who are directly accountable to their constituents and are willing to hear these ideas at the local level. So with that, we'd ask for an unfavorable report on 1079. And again, I'm happy to work with the sponsor and the committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Canale. We have 2 others. Patrick Seipolt from the City of Havre de Grace.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Patrick Seipolt. I'm the Director of Administration for the City of Havre de Grace. The City of Havre de Grace opposes House Bill 1079, in part by what was just represented by Mr. Canale. But further on, as you already know, if passed, this would prohibit a county or municipality from imposing an admission and amusement tax on gross receipts from any charge for participating in an activity that promotes health and physical well-being. Besides the lack of clarity and the broad spectrum of interpretation this bill creates in it, definition and purpose, it deprives a local county or municipality from collecting fees to offset services that they may be providing to sustain or support that enterprise or amusement activity. Case in point, there is a single lane with a height restriction which crosses under the railroad onto a golf course known as Bully Rock. Emergency responders must purchase and employ specialized vehicles sized to fit those physical constraints to provide adequate public safety. The city contributes funds, in part derived from the A&A tax, to subsidize those vehicles. Vehicles and equipment available for providing life-saving measures when called upon. Additional uses for A&A funds include trash collection, park maintenance, and roadway infrastructure maintenance. Most people would agree that amusement type activities are not requirements or necessities for life, but are rather a luxury. It is a tax which is passed through to the participant. It is a very small portion of their fee. For Bully Rock, for example, it would be the cost of a cocktail or a small pizza. Neither one are promoting physical health, are they? Last quarter, for example, that being October through December of 2020, the Bully Rock Golf Course took in $611,000 in green fees. The tax collected from that amounted to $30,000, of which $28,000 passed through to the city. The balance stayed with the comptroller for administrative charges. In short, one size does not fit every circumstance, and I applaud Delegate Attar for considering modifying the legislation. Certainly, this proposed legislation doesn't fit one size fit everybody. Please don't take away the right to legislate authority of a county or municipality to address a local economical concern that doesn't negatively impact the user. However, please understand, not having the authority to levy an A&A tax will have a negative effect on the services that can be afforded an amusement enterprise or an entire community. The City of Havre de Grace urges the committee to give House Bill 1079 an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seipold. Bill George from MML.
Thank you, Chair Kaiser, and good afternoon, members of the committee. Bill George with the Maryland Municipal League here today in opposition to House Bill 1079. I echo much of what my fellow opponents have said thus far. This committee is well aware of the restricted revenue streams that are afforded to municipalities. And within that universe, those that are available to municipalities to set their own rates is even smaller. And it comes down to essentially just property tax and the admissions and amusement tax. Municipalities can set different rates for these different activities, and some may even choose to go at a lower rate or no rate at all on these types of activities that promote healthy and well-being. I will say that I put together some data based off of a report we got from the comptroller's office, and came out with a figure of about $1.4 million annually in potential lost revenue if this bill were to go into effect, and that affects over 80 municipalities out of 157 in the state, so over half. One additional point, and this was touched on by the prior speaker, is that I've also heard from some of our members that say that they use revenue from the admissions and amusement tax to then put into parks and recreational facilities within their municipality, therefore promoting health and well-being activities outdoors within their municipality by collecting tax and then providing services for that. So that is something that our members are interested in keeping. I stand by what Mr. Canale said earlier. This is a local tax, and we oppose not necessarily the types of businesses that would be impacted, but just the restriction on local authority to impose the tax as they see fit for their communities. So with that, we ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Delegate Lutke with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's an actual question this time. So Mr. Kinnelly, Mr. George, I understand the argument about local funding, although, I mean, we all know the ANA is nowhere near the percentage of local revenue of property or income taxes, right? But Delegate Attar's bringing this bill raises some kind of important points here. And I wonder if you or your organizations have any reactions to them. One of them is that the ANA tax, which is the gross receipts tax, is one of the highest business taxes in the state. It's higher than the corporate income tax, right? It's 10%, right? And it creates weird situations where, even though our policy as a state is generally to try to tax similar things in similar ways, a person who goes to an athletic activity and is charged a 10% ANA tax is paying significantly more than a person who buys a set of free weights for their home and is paying a 6% sales tax. So I guess my question is, aside from the we need local revenue issue, what are your thoughts on that sort of more general imbalance in taxation that's raised by this?
Well, I'd say that, there is a check under current law. The total amount cannot exceed 11% total. So if you have, the sales and use tax plus the local emissions and amusement, it can't exceed 11. So it's not like it's 10% on top, up to 10% on top of the sales and use tax. So there is a limit to what the business is actually paying. I understand, your argument about, different classifications and whatnot. And I would just say again that there have been carve outs for certain industries and certain activities, and counties and municipalities are also considering those questions, and they have carved out certain industries. And, as far as local revenues and our ability saying we need the local revenue, we do. And I know this committee understands that. And even if it's not as much as the property or local income tax, if we can fill some potholes with money from emissions and amusement tax, that's a big deal, especially for some of our smaller counties and certainly municipalities. So, that's what I would say about it. I'm happy to talk about it, but I think there is a cap when it comes to the sales and use plus the local admissions and amusement not being able to exceed a certain amount. There is sort of a check, in my opinion, on that.
Sure, although 11% is very high compared to other types of taxation in the state. I think though the question is more, you're treating it as a zero-sum game, right? I mean, are MACO and MML willing to engage in sort of longer term conversations about this tax and how to deal with some of the intricacies of compliance and, differences between industries? I mean, this is from just a pure tax policy, treat everyone fairly perspective. The tax is an unholy mess.
We are happy to talk about this. And I agree with you. If you look at the state law, I mean, again, some of these exemptions, I don't know where they came from or when they were carved out. I think it's important to look at this overall, and we'd be happy to engage in those conversations if you think that would be beneficial. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Lukey, this is Bill from MML, and I echo Kevin's sentiment that absolutely engaging, happy to engage further on the topic of the admissions and amusement tax generally, and talk about its applicability or and inconsistencies thereof.
All right. Thank you all very much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 1079. We'll go to House Bill 815, Delegate Shoemaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of this august committee. I'm reporting live from Route 30. This is a bill that we passed out of this committee unanimously last year, passed the House unanimously, and then got held up in the Senate due to the shortened session. Some of us will recall that in 2019, our good friend Delegate Lukey had a bill pertaining to ag land transfer tax, which we passed. And one of the unintended consequences of that particular piece of legislation was that there were a handful of properties who had contracts pending on them prior to the effective date of that statute, who got caught up in a quagmire that no fault of their own. They hadn't contemplated a change of the law when they entered into the contracts, but they had not gone to settlement yet on their purchases. And several of those were constituents of mine who were selling their farms. And in one particular case, I can tell you that the change in the law would have resulted in these folks losing like $250,000. So I would direct the committee's attention to the testimony that's been submitted by Dave Bowersox, who is a prominent local land attorney in Westminster, who talks about the finer points of what we're trying to do here and the unintended consequences of the message of the 20th.
All right, Delegate, I think we're unfortunately missing a lot. Let's try a question from Delegate Buckle. Maybe he will ask one of those, isn't that so? So it helps your argument along. Go ahead, Delegate.
We'll see if I can. Delegate Shoemaker, if you can hear me, is this a bill that already passed this committee in the House previously under a prior iteration?
It passed last year.
Okay.
Unanimously out of committee and out of the House, and got bottled up in the Senate.
Okay, so it's the same bill that this committee's already considered and passed previously. I appreciate that. And my only second and final question is, if you're going to be doing these hearings from your car, for the good graces of all of us, please, for Lord's sake, change your camera angle. I mean, my God, I feel like just looking straight up your gizzard there.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have a lot to work with.
So many possible responses to that, Delegate Shoemaker. Any other questions for Delegate Shoemaker? Please, no. All right, just mostly kidding. All right, seeing no other questions for Delegate Shoemaker, Delegate Barnes, House Bill 981.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here to speak on House Bill 981. This is a Prince George's County delegation bill. This bill passed in a similar version back in 2017. Unfortunately, the bill had some unintended consequences that were discovered once it became law. The bill original applied to vacant and abandoned properties. The bill not only provided the opportunity for homeowners to those vested in Prince George's County, but also opportunities for rehabilitated and enrolled vacant homes onto the active tax records. This bill will alter the types of property for which tax collectors in Prince George's County should conduct a certain limited auction prior to conducting a public auction for property subject to tax liens. And with that, we ask for a favorable vote.
Thank you, Delegate Barnes. Any questions for Delegate Barnes? I didn't even have a chance to change my name on the screen there, Delegate Barnes. If there's no questions for Delegate Barnes, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 981. To the members, as you know, since this was on the calendar last week, the Senate passed Senate Bill 218. It became in our ownership on Friday. Usually the sign up for Tuesday's hearings are on Friday, but in this case we extended it till Monday. So there was public notice through Friday night and over the weekend, and we had a good number of people sign up. And I would point out that because this bill was dramatically changed in the Senate, essentially this is the only hearing this bill is really having. So typically we do sponsor only on Senate bills, but on this bill, we thought it very important to ensure that we could have people come in and testify. So We will start with Senate Bill 218. However, we are not being visited by the senators today. We have our own Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr, who's going to present Senate Bill 218. Go ahead, Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Palakovich-Carr, here to present Senate Bill 218. We all know that many Marylanders are struggling right now, are struggling to pay their rent or mortgage, to put food on the table, and to meet the basic needs of their family. This legislation would provide much needed relief for low-income Maryland taxpayers who've been excluded from other forms of relief. The first provision of this bill is one that should be familiar to members of this committee, as I presented the House version of the bill a few weeks ago. It would create a Maryland Child Tax Credit, which is a refundable tax credit of up to $500 for very low-income Marylanders who have a child with a disability. The second provision of the bill provides tax relief to a group of Marylanders who were left out of the $1.5 billion Relief Act that passed 2 weeks ago. That law, among other things, expanded the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a very targeted tax credit for low-income workers. It's been called one of the most effective anti-poverty measures in America because it has helped to lift millions of working people out of poverty and to improve their health and educational outcomes for their children. But the expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit we passed in the Relief Act only benefited one group of Marylanders, those with a Social Security number. That group includes U.S. citizens as well as certain immigrants, including green card holders, people with work visas, DACA recipients, TPS recipients, and others. And so under the Relief Act, one group of citizens and immigrants has been provided with economic relief. But that law left out another group of U.S. citizens and immigrants, those who file their taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, an ITIN. Marylanders who have an ITIN are productive members of our state. Many of them work as essential frontline workers and have been risking their health and their lives day in and day out during this pandemic to care for the infirm and the elderly and to ensure that we have food and that buildings are cleaned and sanitized. Collectively, Marylanders with ITINs pay $332 million a year in state and local taxes, including $108 million a year in income taxes. SB 218 would allow this group of tax-paying working Marylanders to get the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is the exact same tax credit that other low-income working Marylanders are currently receiving. Some examples of taxpayers who are currently excluded from the Earned Income Tax Credit include military families, where one parent is serving in the U.S. Armed Services and is a green card holder, but their spouse and or children have ITINs. Similarly, other Marylanders who have an employment-based visa or authorization to work, but their family members have ITINs are excluded from the EITC under current law. Mixed status families where the children are U.S. citizens, but the parents have ITINs are also excluded. And Marylanders who are working their way through the immigration process are also currently excluded from this tax credit. For instance, victims of human trafficking who were smuggled into the U.S. against their will and who were forced into prostitution or slavery. If these victims work with law enforcement to bring their perpetrators to justice, they can get a U visa and are eligible for a Social Security number. But it's currently a 5-year wait to have an application for a U visa processed. Similarly, immigrants who've applied for a green card through a federal program for the victims of domestic violence can wait nearly 2 years for their application to be processed. Refugees and asylum seekers also face long waits. In the meantime, these Marylanders are doing the right thing by paying their taxes using an ITIN, but under current law, they are excluded from the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's vital for us to pass this legislation, as this group of Marylanders have been left out of almost every other type of relief. Marylanders with an ITIN don't qualify for federal stimulus checks, for unemployment benefits, or for SNAP or other federal benefits. Yet just like other people, these Marylanders are suffering great hardships because of the pandemic. I ask the committee to recognize that a Marylander is a Marylander, no matter what type of tax ID number they have. We are all just people doing our best to help each other to get through this pandemic. SB 218 would ensure that all Maryland taxpayers have access to a little help during this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you for stepping in for Senator King today. We'll start with Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, my friend Delegate Palakovich-Carr. I have a couple of questions, try to be reasonably brief. And as always, as well, you know me, it's not quiz show. I'm not trying to trip you up. And if you don't know, that's fine. But I do have a couple of questions about some of the numbers or the rubrics of this, of how people would fit into these categories. I really appreciate what you said about an awful lot of people who file under ITIN are here lawfully. they're here. The federal government that controls our immigration status has deemed and determined that they're perfectly permissible for them to be here. They're not violating any immigration law or law of the federal government to the best of our knowledge. But out of these filers, I think the number was, we estimate, is there about 80,000? Is that what the comptroller?
86,000 filed, I-10 filers filed taxes in Maryland in 2019, according to the comptroller's office.
Okay. Is there any way to break down out of that 86,000, how many of those individuals fit within a subcategory of people who aren't here lawfully, who don't meet any of the criteria you described, that they're on a valid green card, that they're a military individual, that they're a Cuban? I know there's special programs for Cuban and Haitian refugees who we have wide open arms for to come here because of what's going on in their countries. Is there any way that you have information, or the comptroller has information, about how many people within that 86,000 would not fit into those lawful categories of federal immigration status?
No, that's simply an unknowable number. I did confirm that with the comptroller's office. They do not know who is an undocumented immigrant versus who has lawful status among I-10 filers. That is something simply the comptroller's office does not know. At the federal level, people do have to submit a form with the IRS in order to receive their I-10 number. And I did actually look at that form, but there's no checkbox that says, I'm an undocumented immigrant.
Yeah.
8 or 10 categories that are on there for reasons why you would be requesting an I-10 number. None of them would be specific to one group of immigrants or specific to an undocumented immigrant.
And then out of the 86,000 roughly filers of under the I-10 system that the comptroller identified, do we have a rough guesstimate from DLS or anyone else as to how many of those 86,000 filers would likely qualify for the EITC benefit, given the income caps and the number of children and all those things? Because it's not all 86,000 are going to qualify.
Right. It would not be the whole amount. And I'll say actually just those numbers are likely to vary a lot from year to year. In the fiscal note, they actually point out that the number of I-10 filers and the number of tax returns filed by I-10 filers and Marylanders just changes a lot from year to year. For instance, back in 2016, it was 146,000 tax forms, but back in 2019, that was down to 86,000. So there just is a lot of variation from year to year. But the fiscal note points out that if you use 2018 as an example year, there were a total of 110,000 I-10 filers. 83,000 of them would have qualified under the bill.
So you're thinking maybe, I know this is just rough math and you and I probably aren't the best mathematicians. You're better than what I am on the committee. But roughly maybe 66, 75% of the I-10 filers would typically fit within these criteria, and that would vary obviously from year to year.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be safe to make an assumption about that would hold in any given year.
Yeah, and that's one of my concerns is it's difficult to really forecast the fiscal impact of something when you don't really know how many people are going to get it. That's a universal thing. My last and final question. Am I correct in my understanding that this tax credit that would be extended to the I-10 filers is refundable, meaning that they may get money back, as many of our credits are, they may get money back in excess of what they actually paid in. So they might have had a Maryland taxable income or a Maryland taxable income obligation to the state of, I'll just make up a number, $2,000, get more money back than what they paid in because this is refundable.
So our state's EITC tax credit is actually a little more complicated than that. There is both a non-refundable portion of the credit and a refundable portion of the credit. So some people only qualify for the non-refundable portion and not the refundable portion. I've not been able to track down any details about how many people fall into that circumstance. So that's important to note, just because you qualify for the state's EITC, it doesn't actually mean that you get a refund, is part one. Other than that, I think the broader issue of, okay, are they getting a refund? If you get a refund, is that more than you've actually paid in? I think it's a little narrow to look at it from that perspective because people do pay a variety of other taxes. So even if someone, and right now that happens with people who get the earned income tax credit, Marylanders who are currently getting this tax credit today, they might get a refund that is for more than what they paid in on taxes. However, they paid a myriad of other taxes to the state, including property taxes, sales tax, excise taxes, et cetera. So on the whole, they are still paying a net positive to the state.
All right, thank you, Delegate. We'll move to the next questions. Delegate Shoemaker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had one or two questions regarding the fiscal impact of this particular bill. We know that when this idea was being bandied about a couple of weeks ago in connection with the relief bill, we were told that it would have like a $30 million price tag to it. And apparently now it's $60 million. Can you tell us, Delegate Polakovich-Carr, what the difference is as to why the price tag is doubled since we discussed it a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the origin was of that original $30 million price. I mean, I can only go with the same information that you have, which is what's in the fiscal note for this bill, which is for 2021, $65 million.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. The follow-up question I have to that is, now you indicated that the impetus behind this is to provide relief for folks who have been, suffering as a result of the pandemic and consequences associated with that and all that sort of thing. It's my understanding in reading this, though, that, this is a 3-year bill. So how do you reconcile the fact that it's targeted relief for folks who are in the throes of crises stemming from the pandemic, with the fact that we're extending this proposal would extend that relief over a 3-year period, hopefully well after this mess is over with.
And you are right. The bill as drafted is for 3 tax years, 2020, 2021, and 2022. No one's expecting that this pandemic's going to end tomorrow, and even when there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of vaccinations, no one's expecting an immediate economic recovery. Just was reading recently that many labor economists are predicting it's going to be a 10-year recovery until we get back to full employment after this pandemic. So we can certainly expect that there's going to be many industries and types of businesses that will be struggling for years, and that means less employment for people who are having a harder time finding a job or who are underemployed and can't get as many hours as they want. So they will continue to struggle because of that. I think to the broader point, and we kind of have to separate what's in the bill versus what individual people are going to get. And there actually has been some good research around the earned income tax credit that most people who get the credit don't claim it for years upon end. Really that they usually only get it for 1 or 2 years. There was one study I found that looked over an 18-year period, and it actually found that for somebody who claimed the earned income tax credit in any of those 18 years, that 61% of those people only claimed it for 1 or 2 years over an 18-year period. So this isn't actually a tax credit that people get and then stay on for long periods of time. And that actually is, as I mentioned earlier, it's part of the reason why this is considered a great anti-poverty measure, because it gives a small little lift up to people when they really need it, when their income has fallen, and then it actually helps boost them back up the socioeconomic ladder to the point where they make too much money to claim the credit anymore. So they've graduated out of it.
Thank you.
And Delegate Polakovich-Carr, I was going to ask a similar question. So someone earning near the top end, if they earn another 10 or 15,000 the next year, because as Delegate Shoemaker suggests, the challenges with the pandemic are over, they are now no longer qualified for the earned income tax credit if they're the higher income level.
That's exactly right. There's very clear income thresholds that are built into both the federal and state credits. If you make more money than that, you're just simply disqualified from getting any amount of money under the credit. And the IRS points out that in any given year, about a third of people who had claimed the earned income tax credit the prior year are no longer eligible the following year.
Thank you. We do have at least one more set of questions. We'll start with Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on the bill. So in 2015, Congress enacted legislation about the I-10s, and apparently the filers have to refile to get the I-10. In other words, it has a shelf life of roughly 5 years. Additionally, if you do not use the I-10 for 3 years, in other words, if you don't file during those 3 years, it also expires. Seeing how that change was made in 2012, my question is, if you are an I-10 filer and you're making under 6,000, which is the cap, the likelihood of you filing your taxes is very low because I don't think there would be any incentive for you to file. So are we missing a huge part of that cohort? And what's going to be the efficacy of actually getting this money to folks if their I-10's expired?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And actually, it gives me an opportunity just to clarify about the two different provisions under the bill. So under the child tax credit, the Maryland child tax credit, the maximum eligible income is $6,000. For the earned income tax credit, it actually varies based off of the size of your household and how many dependent children you have. So someone who is single, not married, no kids, can make up to about roughly $16,000 and be eligible for the federal and state, earned income tax credits. It varies, whether you're married and how many children you have, but the very top income earners would be a married couple with 3 or more kids, and I believe they can make about $57,000 and qualify for something under the federal and state programs right now.
Okay, great. And then if someone does have an expired I-10, are they still eligible, or how would that?
No, because if your I-10 number has expired because you haven't been filing your taxes, my understanding is it'd be rejected both by the federal government and the comptroller's office because it's not a valid tax ID number.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Delegate Plakovich-Carr? I wouldn't be surprised, Delegate, if with the 12 people who are testifying, if there's another technical question, we might come back to you. But we will start with Pablo Blank. Mr. Blank, are you here?
Sorry, thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Yes, the computer was not responding to my commands. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. My name is Pablo Blanc. I am the Director of Immigrant Integration with CASA, the largest immigrant rights organization in Maryland. We represent over 100,000 Black and Latino members. CASA is in strong support of the bill as it will represent another step toward the inclusion of those Marylanders who pay taxes year after year after year with an I-10. Even after working in essential jobs during the pandemic and contributing millions of dollars in Maryland and federal taxes, they receive almost no benefit for fulfilling their tax duties. They are among the ones who are suffering the most the medical and economic consequences of the pandemic. I want to remind the committee that the exclusion of I-10 holders from the EITC does not just affect them, but their spouses, their children, their babies, and their entire families, many of whom are U.S. citizens or green card holders. Today, you will hear from I-10 holders and also from their families who are being economically punished as well. For example, you will hear from Amanda, a lawful permanent resident who has been paying taxes with a Social Security number as single and receiving the Maryland EITC for her 2 kids, who are U.S. citizens. She feels lucky to have found a person who she loves and loves her back, but her husband happened to file taxes with an I-10. Thus, they do not receive the ITC for the 2 kids they have together, who are also U.S. citizens. She still considers herself lucky, but wonders why she and her kids are being punished just because her husband used an I-10 for filing taxes. Think of the other 86,000 stories, similar in scope and suffering like the ones you will hear today. Immigrant families has been hit the hardest by the pandemic. This relief is not only earned, but it is desperately needed. It is fair, it is inclusive, and it is also a good public policy because in addition to positively impacting I-10 holders, it will increase the Maryland GDP and employment rate through the economic multiplier. Member of the committee, as you work on finalizing this bill, please remember the thousands of Marylanders like Amanda and many more. This bill It's about helping the most vulnerable people who right now are doing basic choices between basic necessities. This bill is about creating a state with more racial and economic equity. As I said before, COVID doesn't discriminate. It affects all Marylanders regardless if they pay taxes with an ITIN or a social security number. It is time for Maryland to extend the earned income tax credit to everyone who has earned it. Please pass the bill. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Blank. I'll take the next person signed up, Jennifer Ventura.
Hello, good afternoon, members of committee and chair. My name is Jennifer Ventura. I am a CASA member and I am also a senior at Lake High School in Montgomery County. I am here in support of SB 218 to ensure the state of Maryland supports families with individual taxpayer identification number. I am a U.S. citizen and my mom has been paying taxes for the last 20 years with an ITIN number. My mom is a single mother. She cleans houses for a living, and during the current pandemic, my mom's job has been unstable. My mom had savings, but we were not ready for this crisis as much Americans were. We did not have the proper support and we are struggling. I feel like tons of people are going through the same situation as I am. As a senior, I should be worrying about colleges, scholarships, and my future. I shouldn't be worried if my mom and I can afford rent, you know? Or if I have a place to live. Housing is a basic human right, and knowing that a landlord can take our home away is crazy. This is a stressful situation, and we shouldn't be forgotten during this pandemic. Families have so many expenses, from car insurance to rent to food to discretionary expenses. This country has become wealthy by the exploitation of African Americans, Indigenous Americans, and immigrants. We are a part of the backbone of the United States, and we should give back to the people who made this country. There is no reason why we shouldn't be supporting the immigrant community during these difficult times. My mother, like so many immigrants, pays so much in taxes, and they are forgotten when it comes to policymaking. I'm currently doing my own research project for school on how immigrants contribute in taxes and the economy, and how little they receive back when it comes to welfare. Undocumented immigrants should be counted. We're all humans. We all deserve human basic rights. And we have to remember that we are all going through this pandemic together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ventura. I'll next call on Amanda Rivera. And to the timekeeper, you can double the time for the translation, due to the translation.
Hola, soy Amanda Rivera, soy miembro de CASA, vivo en Burstonville, al condado de Montgomery, en Maryland. Estoy a favor de la legislación para asegurar que el Estado pueda apoyar a las familias que pagamos impuestos con el ITIN. Soy residente y...
Un segundo para traducir, Amanda.
Ok, gracias.
My name is Amanda Rivera. I'm a member of CASA, and I live in the area of Burtonsville, Maryland. I'm here in support of legislation SB 218 to make sure that we support the different families that pay taxes with ITIN.
Perdón. Soy residente, estoy acá del año 1999. Soy madre de 4 hijos, incluyendo 2 niños pequeños.
I'm a lawful permanent resident. I've been living here since 1999 for about 20 years, and I'm a mother of 4 kids, including 2 U.S. citizens.
Todo el tiempo he pagado los taxis, los impuestos, pero hace unos años atrás que me casé con mi esposo y él tiene el ITIN, y desde entonces cambiaron las cosas.
So I've always been paying taxes, including when I married my husband, and that's when things in the taxes changed a little bit.
Desde que pago los taxis junto con mi esposo, la IRS no nos da más crédito por nuestros hijos. Realmente nunca he entendido las razones, pero es duro el saber que ahora en este coronavirus hemos sido afectados mucho igual que otras familias, que muchas familias.
So when we started paying jointly, we no longer receive the funds when it comes to our children. And as many other families, we've been impacted as well by the pandemic.
La verdad es que cuando hablaron de los estímulos, no, me sentí mal el saber que por estar casada con una persona que tiene el ITIN, yo era discriminada, igual que mis hijos. No íbamos a recibir ningún beneficio.
When we started talking about the pandemic, we realized that my family was not going to receive any support, and we felt discriminated that we weren't being included.
En realidad estoy acá para pedir que seamos las familias, como en mi caso, que somos muchas, que conozco, como en mi iglesia, amigos. Me gustaría que tomara en cuenta de que nosotros pagamos los taxis, las personas que tenemos social pagan así igual, aunque estemos casados con alguien que tiene ITIN, se pagan taxis todos los años.
There's so many different people that are in the same situation, including friends, people at my church. And we definitely want to make sure that everyone that is paying their taxes the moment with their ITIN, that they're also included.
Gracias por darnos este tiempo y espero de que el Estado pueda tomar en cuenta lo que estamos pidiendo, de que realmente sean tomadas en cuenta las personas que tienen ITIN, igual que los que hacemos los taxis con social.
Thank you for your time, and I hope that you are able to include different folks, including people that have ITIN number, including families that are mixed that have social securities as well.
All right, thank you so much. Gracias. We have Robin McKinney from the Cash Campaign of Maryland.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robin McKinney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Cash Campaign of Maryland. Cash stands for Creating Asset Savings and Hope, and we help low to moderate income Marylanders across the state to file their taxes. So we work with a lot of folks who use an ITIN. So we're here in very strong support of Senate Bill 218. The earned income tax credit was created to offset a whole host of taxes, income and payroll taxes being just one. As the delegate and sponsor mentioned, that there are over $332 million paid by immigrant taxpayers each and every year into the economy of Maryland. This committee and the General Assembly had the good thought to expand the earned income tax credit as part of the Relief Act. And just like this bill, the Relief Act expanded the earned income tax credit for 3 years. So the expansions here actually mirror the same expansions that were made for folks who happen to be using a Social Security number in the relief bill. I also want to underscore that the income, residency, qualifying child, all of that is exactly the same. It's just if you happen to use an ITIN versus a Social Security number. To the point also about renewals is a lot of our partners, including CASA, help people to file their ITINs as well as to do their renewals. That's a really important part. The people that come to get their taxes done, what I really want you to remember is that these are folks who want to be compliant. They want to pay taxes. They want to do the right thing and show that they're here and they are following the rules. These are folks who often owe each and every year because they don't qualify for the variety of benefits, but also, unfortunately, a lot of members in this community are taken advantage of, and instead of getting a double W-2 for their employer, they get a 1099, like they're self-employed, and they're not. And so they're also paying self-employment tax, and they don't have anything to write off against it because they're going each and every day to a job. I have a personal friend who's an electrician who paid an average of $2,500 in just federal taxes alone each and every year just because of that misqualification. And he was making about $15,000 a year. So that was a lot of money out to him that he was having to pay in self-employment tax. So again, these are folks that want to be compliant, that are following the rules, that are paying. And so just because this is a refundable credit, not everyone is going to get a refund. There are folks who this is just going to reduce their tax liability. But again, these are our friends. These are our neighbors. These are essential workers. These are the people that are next door to the folks that we supported through the Relief Act. And we need to help them too in their time of need. They're helping us and we need to help them. So with that, I urge a favorable report of Senate Bill 218.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. Are there any questions for the first 4 people who have signed up? Thank you all very much. Thank you for being a part of the process today. I'll go to the next 4. We have Jackie Vimo. Sorry if I didn't pronounce her last name correctly.
That's right. Check your head. Great. So my name is Jackie Vimo. Thanks so much for having me speak today. And I'm here to testify in support of SB 218. I work with the National Immigration Law Center, and we are a national organization that works with on litigation and policy to address the needs of low-income immigrants. And I oversee tax policy and anti-poverty policy at NILC. And I've been working in the field of immigration policy for over 2 decades, including PhD work. And over the last year, I've been working really closely with various states on designing their immigrant inclusive tax credit policies. And I've also been working with Congress on COVID relief measures to address immigrants, and I've been writing a lot of the legislation. So I know that a lot of folks have already talked specifically about the urgency of including all taxpayers, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, just really quickly, about the individual taxpayer identification number. Sort of more broadly, I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page, and happy to sort of share my expertise in terms of answering questions. So I think that the individual taxpayer identification number is one of the most misunderstood aspects of our nation's tax policy. Again, most taxpayers file taxes with a Social Security number, and the purpose of the Social Security number is just to track accurate earnings records for a person working with an employment covered by Social Security program. That's it. It's not an identification number. It's a tracking number for the Social Security program. And since many immigrants are ineligible for the Social Security number program, despite the fact they make contributions to support the program, the IRS started issuing an ITIN number, an individual taxpayer identification number, back in 1996 in order for them to be able to file taxes, right? So the ITIN is, again, just to file taxes. So I think that it's important to also know that the federal government also allows for states to be able to, to provide tax credits to residents who pay taxes with an ITIN. And I think that the fact that this is, legally permissible is clear from the fact that there are already 2 states who have passed immigrant inclusive EITC bills. So last year, California and Colorado became the first states to actually pass this type of legislation. So Maryland is certainly not the first. And this is driven by the urgency of the COVID-19 pandemic. And an immigrant inclusive EITC bill also passed the New Mexico House of Representatives last year, and at least 10 states, that includes Maryland, are currently in the process of considering similar legislation, right? California, actually, their policy opens eligibility to the Cal EITC to 600,000 Californians. That includes 200,000 kids. And I think that it's really important to note also that in states like California, much like states like Maryland, 2/3 of the workers are employed in essential jobs. So again, there's no way to exclude, I think that the fact of mixed status families, that 1 in 4 children in Maryland and in the country have a foreign-born parent, means there's no way to exclude immigrants from these types of measures without excluding citizens, and especially the ones that are hardest that are hit are kids. And that includes 2.2 million US citizen kids and green card holders who still have not received a penny in federal relief from the CARES Act or from any of the economic impact payments. And so Maryland really, sort of could play a crucial role in filling that gap. So thank you for the opportunity to testify.
All right, thank you. We next have Regan Vaughn.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Regan Vaughn. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Catholic Charities, and I'm also here to ask for your support of Senate Bill 218. Catholic Charities provides care and services to vulnerable Marylanders throughout Western and Central Maryland. We have over 80 programs at over 300 sites, and we've witnessed firsthand the devastating impact the pandemic has had on the health and economic security of vulnerable populations. And this has been particularly true through our work at the Esperanza Center, which is an immigrant resource center. The Esperanza Center began operations in 1963, and in their almost 60 years of operation, they've served thousands of immigrant families who are simply seeking a better life and then watch those families become part of the fabric of our society. Immigrant workers cultivate and harvest the food we eat. They construct the buildings we live in. They serve as domestic workers. They offer their hospitality in restaurants and hotels. They're volunteers in our churches and in the community at large. And their children go to school with my children and your children. They're our neighbors and our friends, and they're also taxpayers. Yet when the pandemic struck, the immigrant community was largely left out of any relief effort. They didn't qualify for unemployment. They weren't sent those stimulus checks. Their occupations generally didn't permit remote working. So they either risked their health to continue working or risk the economic security of their families by following the advice to stay home. And that's if they had a choice, because many lost their jobs or had their hours significantly cut. We've heard their stories, mainly through 2 hotlines we stood up last spring. One was the hotline to help individuals apply for benefits. It focused on SNAP. And because we were able to offer bilingual assistance, we got a lot of calls from the immigrant community. And then we also set up a multilingual triage health hotline with Johns Hopkins and the Baltimore Community Foundation to help do referrals for individuals who had questions about COVID. And we heard heartbreaking stories of families who just wanted to remain healthy while still trying to provide for their children. And while we could give them information about COVID, we could schedule testing, there was almost nothing we could offer in terms of economic relief, except referrals to food pantries and to local churches. Opening up access to the EITC for these families will be a lifeline as they recover and once again become economic drivers in our community. So I ask that as this General Assembly considers the different ways to help Marylanders rebuild their financial security, that you pass SB 218 so that we can all recover together and we're not leaving anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. We're going to go next to Kelly Shumitz, and I'm going to hand things over to Delegate Washington for a few minutes.
Thank you, Chair Kaiser and members of the committee. My name is Callie Shumitz with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. I just want to say, appreciate this committee's efforts and the General Assembly's efforts for expanding the EITC with the Relief Act so far this year. We are here to support SB 218 to kind of build on that and close another gap in eligibility for the EITC that will help support the state's recovery from the pandemic. By continuing to expand the EITC, we have the opportunity not only, as others have said, to support our neighbors and help more Marylanders make ends meet, but to do so in a way that strengthens communities and supports our economy. We've had many conversations with this committee over the years about the effectiveness of the EITC. It increases economic security for low and moderate households, which is linked to improved health. It helps kids reach higher levels of education and other benefits that are associated with reducing levels of poverty. This increased economic security is not only good for those families and who benefit from it, but it makes our community stronger and more resilient. It will help us recover from the pandemic. It's also good for local businesses as they depend on people in the community having money to spend. And these benefits are even greater at a time when so many people in our communities are struggling. We believe that decoupling from this discriminatory federal policy that excludes taxpayers based on their immigration status is the right thing to do in general. And it comes as a really critical moment, as prior speakers have mentioned, as people who pay taxes with an ITIN have been left out of virtually every federal and state relief effort so far. And that also includes, the current policy also excludes families with a mix of statuses, some with social security numbers and ITINs. Many people with incomes in the EITC range work in service industry positions, which means that many are in essential jobs or have lost work because their businesses have closed or have had to cut hours. And the economic support that the EITC can provide is more critical than ever as Maryland families weather the storm created by COVID-19. We think it makes sense for Maryland to apply consistent rules and ensure that all low-income Maryland taxpayers are included in these valuable economic support. So we would ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 218. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Let's go to Daisha Miguel.
Hi, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Daishi Miguel Tanaka with the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. Our mission is to advance the civil and human rights for Asian Americans and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. It's important that we remember that when we talk about immigrants, it includes immigrants from all over the world that have chosen Maryland as their home. Policy to support immigrants is often taught to only be on the Latino issue. However, Maryland is home to over 415,000 Asian Americans, making up about 7% of the population. And there are 226,000 Asian immigrants. So this bill is really about breaking down racial and economic barriers for all people of color. Naturally, there are millions of immigrants doing essential work for this country, many of them low-wage workers who have lost income due to illness or from taking time off to quarantine and keep their families safe. Others have lost their jobs entirely and do not qualify for unemployment insurance. An I-10 holder exclusion from the EITC doesn't just affect immigrants who pay taxes with an I-10. As you may have heard, it affects their spouses, their children, their families who are in many cases are US citizens and green card holders. So any government spending that immigrants receive should be seen as investments to the health, education, and overall development of families that would contribute to the social fabric of Maryland. Now, I myself grew up in this country since I was 6 years old with my Filipino-Japanese family. My parents were low-wage, elderly caretakers working for $6 an hour. We filed our taxes with an I-10 to have a record of our contributions to this country. When we finally get a chance to apply for green cards, we can prove our presence. But when my parents became ill, they didn't qualify for government assistance and they ended up self-deporting to seek help. Now, I share this because my story is one that's too late. But right now, there are 35,000 Asian families in Maryland that would suffer like my family if they were excluded from relief. And we can't stand by and just allow our brothers and sisters in Maryland to get left out. And SB 218 takes steps to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next witness will be Reverend Kobe Little, a good brother. Reverend, are you there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Reverend Kobe Little. I represent the Maryland State Conference of the NAACP. And I'm here in that capacity, but also as a faith leader. We urge a favorable report on on Senate Bill 218. This is a moral issue. This is an economic security and economic justice issue. And this is a health security and health justice issue. I-10 holders are lawful. They work, they contribute to society, and they pay their taxes. These I-10 holders are often our grocery store workers, our food service workers, our housekeepers, and those who have been combating COVID-19 by keeping our spaces clean. This legislation is about providing economic assistance, economic relief for Marylanders. There is no relief if there's only relief for some. If there's not relief for everyone, then there really isn't relief. But this isn't just about economic security. This is about health security. This is about making sure that Marylanders have the resources that they need to stay in their homes, to consume healthy food, and to take the precautions necessary to avoid infection with the COVID virus, the coronavirus disease. If we aren't providing this economic relief to I-10 holders, then we're not only leaving them vulnerable, but we're leaving their spouses, their children, their families, and in fact, all of their neighbors. In other words, all of us Marylanders vulnerable. We will be recovering from this pandemic for years after the threat of infection has subsided. We must take action now to provide assistance through this Earned Income Tax Credit Program for all Marylanders. And I want to salute the leadership of the House and the Senate, as well as Delegate Polakovich-Carr for coming forward and supporting this. We were certainly disappointed to see this legislation left out of the earlier bill, and we're glad to see the House and Senate working to pass this bill now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. We urge a favorable report on this legislation.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker will be Claudia Ruiz with her translator, I believe it's Lady Cabone.
Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes, delegados. Mi nombre es Claudia Ruiz.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia.
Oh, okay, Anna.
Vivo en el condado de Baltimore y antes de comenzar quisiera pedirles que cerraran sus ojos e imagínense que llevan 15 años pagando sus impuestos.
So before we get started, I ask you to close your eyes, imagining that you have been paying taxes for the last 15 years.
Que durante la pandemia usted y su esposa o esposo se enfermen de COVID y tuvieran que quedarse 3 semanas sin poder trabajar y sin poder conseguir dinero para la renta.
Imagining that that your family gets sick and that you're not able to pay for rent or different situations at this moment.
Ni tener alimentos y ser excluidos de algún alivio económico solo por su estatus migratorio.
Imagine not being able to receive any form of funding just because of your immigration status.
¿Les parece justo?
Do you think that's fair?
Pues esto nos pasó a mí y a miles de familias inmigrantes que hemos estado al frente de esta pandemia.
This has happened to so many different families during this time in the pandemic.
Tengo una hija que es enfermera, que está luchando por la salud de otras personas.
My daughter is a nurse and she's fighting for the health of so many different families.
Otra de mis hijas trabaja en el área de limpieza en hospitales.
Another one that is working in cleaning different hospitals.
Mi esposo trabaja en construcción y electricidad.
My husband works in construction and electrician.
Por eso estoy hoy aquí para concientizarlos de que aprueben esta ley. He escuchado que algunos legisladores
And that's the reason I'm asking that you approve this law, especially because I've heard many policymakers.
Nos critican por nuestro estatus migratorio.
Because they criticize for our immigration status.
Pero se olvidan que han recibido dinero que viene de estos impuestos.
But they forget that they have received funding from the different taxes that we paid.
Que estamos pagando miles de inmigrantes.
That millions of immigrants are paying.
Desde hace años y por eso hoy les digo que es su deber estar velando por las necesidades de todos los residentes.
That residents have been paying for so many different years, and we're asking that you are able to support us.
Deben ser justos, no estamos pidiendo nada gratis. Sabemos que desde que estamos pagando impuestos, nos están dando un derecho.
We are asking this for, we think that this is fair. We have been paying taxes for so many long time.
Y por eso hoy les digo que deben aprobar esta ley. Es justo y humano. Gracias.
And that's the reason we think that this law is fair and humane.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of these two previous speakers? 3, excuse me. Seeing none, thank you very much. Let's go to Lady Cabone. Ms. Cambone? Okay, last speaker on this bill is Musa Colby. Musa, you're around, or Ms. Cabone? All right, that concludes the public hearing for Senate Bill 218. Madam Chair, are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Mr. Vice. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And I know you called those names, but just to give them another chance, Liddy Cabone or Musa Kolbe, just to double check. All right, I want to thank everyone who testified today, and thanks to all the members. We're done with the hearing on Bill 218 and done with the hearing for today. I do want to remind members, if you're on the Revenues Subcommittee, you will be voting at 5:30 tonight, and full committee will be voting at 7:45 tonight. I believe the voting list is already up online and has been shared with everyone's office. Are there any other announcements from any other subcommittee chairs?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Education Subcommittee will not meet tomorrow. We'll meet next week for a long voting session and discussion.
Which day, I'm sorry?
Next week, Wednesday, we'll meet for a long voting session and discussion on about 9 bills.
Okay, Delegate Ebersole?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. We're not meeting this. We may meet late this week, more likely early next week.
All right, just going across my screen. Delegate Barnes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Local revenues, stay tuned. We may be meeting Thursday.
Delegate Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gaming and racing will probably have a work session early next week.
And Delegate Wilkins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Election Law Subcommittee will meet on Thursday. It looks like revenues may also be meeting, so we'll most likely meet after revenues, but I'll follow up with everyone on the specific time.
All right, thank you all very much. Thank you again to all the members. I don't know if anyone noticed the name of the clock tonight. I think that was a suggestion of Delegate Guyton, though as you can see, the entire name does not fit on the screen. All right, if there's nothing else, thank you all. We will end the live stream.